All right, so welcome to the CGT on exploitative formulation and decision making. So today's learning outcome, we're going to explain how GTO and exploitative play are related. Then we're going to discuss how player reads will impact our counter strategy. And then we're going to basically use player reads to construct strong exploitative adjustments to our own strategy to increase RV against specific opponents. All right, so when we're thinking about exploiting, we have to answer these two questions. The first one is whether or not we should deviate from GTO, and secondly, how far we should deviate from GTO. Right? Once we know the answer to these two questions, we can think about what our specific exploit is going to be, and then use the exploit to increase our EV. Okay, so this is our decision tree. All right, and we're going to use this decision tree to simplify all of our decisions going forward. All right. These questions in this decision tree answer the first question we had, whether or not we should deviate from GTO. Okay, so the first question that we ask ourselves when we're put in a spot where we think that we can deviate from GTO to increase our EV. First, have I played near enough GTO so far? Right? And if the answer is no, you have to ask yourself why. And the only correct answer as to why you shouldn't have been playing GTO so far is because you're already exploiting them. Does that make sense?
Can you explain that a little bit further?
Okay, so the first question you ask yourself is, have I played GTO so far, right? Or close to GTO so far?
Yeah.
All right. And if the answer is no, there has to be a reason why. And the only acceptable reason is if you're already exploiting them. All right?
Oh, okay. Because okay. So the only reason why you're not playing GTO is because you're exploiting. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you should have been playing GTO so far, getting to this point.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Okay. So the answer is yes. So I played GTO so far, and now in this spot, do I know what the GTO play is? Okay. And if the answer is no, then everything that you do from now on is effectively just trash, right? If you don't know what the GTO play is, we can't actually exploit our opponent very well. We're sort of shooting in the dark here, okay? Right. So do I know what the GTO play is, or do I know what the ballpark for GTO play is going to be in the spot? Okay. If the answer is no, then I just have to go and learn what the GTO play is, right? I have to go back off the table work, running the sims on this spot, and then that's it, right? So there's nothing that we can do if we don't know what the GTO play is in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does to me.
Does that make sense to everybody else?
Yeah, it makes sense for me. Yeah.
Okay. So if the answer to the question is yes, then we move to the next question. Do I have any reads on my opponent? Okay. Do I have any information about my opponent that is going to allow me to change my strategy in a way that increases my EV? Even if the read is very small, right? And if the answer to that is no, then, well, I just have to default to GTO, right? Because anything which I do will make me exploitable. Anything which I do may actually reduce my EV against this opponent. So I'm just going to take the safest line possible and just play GTO. All right. So this is the decision tree which is making at basically every spot, right? Whether I can deviate from GTO right now. Okay. Every decision you make, you should be running through this tree very quickly as you're playing. Right. And the answer to this a lot of it should just be no, right? Well, the answer to the first question should just be yes. And then do I know what GTO plays in the spot is yes, and do I have any reads? No. Then I just go and play GTO. All right. So a lot of it is you're either getting and just playing GTO when you just so yes, yes, no, or you don't know what GTO is, so I have to go out and learn it. So a lot of time in this decision tree, we end up playing GTO. Does that make sense to everybody? I can hear people's eyes glazed over. Does that make sense?
No, I got it. For me, maybe that first question could very well be, have I played near GTO so far? The answer could be, well, I really don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
well,
that could be part of the second question.
You have to know the GTO in order to answer the first question. Really. Okay. So if you go to preflop, okay, I have my ranges up and they're close enough to GTO, so you can just say, oh, I played preflop correctly. All right. And now we're getting to the flop. Have I played GTO so far? Yes. Do I know what GTO is in the spot? No. Okay. So then suddenly you've gone from pre-flop. You can answer the first question as yes, but now just on the flop, the answer to the second question is no. And so I have to go and learn GTO. Right. There's nothing I can do right now to try and exploit my opponent.
Mm.
Okay. And then you just have to accept any decisions that you make from now on are likely going to be wrong.
So for the first question, when you say like play near GTO so far, is that just like overall in the match, like
no, in the game tree that you have, right? You've been dealt the cards. Say you're on the river. Have I played GTO up into the river? Or,
okay.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's got nothing to do with other hands that you might have played.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Now I get it.
It's only in this specific hand, in this specific tree.
Okay.
Okay. So it's in the decision tree. I get it.
Right. So this decision tree is about this specific hand, this specific node in this specific tree. So have I played GTO up until this point in the tree?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Have I played GTO up until the turn? From preflop to the turn, have I played GTO in a GTO-ish way? If the answer to all that is yes, then we can continue to the next question. Do I know what GTO is in this specific spot? All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you answer those two questions, you answer those two questions as yes. Then you can ask if you have any reads. And if you don't have any reads, you just go and play GTO. Because you know what GTO is, you can play that. Just play that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the answer question is yes, if you do have reads. Right. So the answer to all these questions is yes. I've played GTO so far. I know what GTO is right now. And I have reads. Then I can think about exploiting. But if the answers to any of these questions is no, then you don't worry about exploiting.
Okay. And if you answer no for the second question, like you just have to improvise or something, I guess, or
yeah, you just have to guess, right? You have to accept that your play can be wrong, and you have to play as best as you think you can, and then look at that spot later on, do the off-table analysis of that spot to see if you played it correctly.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you can see how important GTO is before we start exploiting, right? Before we start even worrying about whether or not we can exploit our opponents, right? We have to know what the GTO is. We have to know what the GTO play is in a spot before worrying what our opponent, anything about our opponent. And doing this often means that a lot of the quote unquote exploits which you have made in the past just aren't real exploits, right? They're just playing bad, or they're playing in a non-GTO way because you didn't know what GTO was, and you've gone and rationalized your decisions based on reads which you had, but you couldn't have applied them properly because you didn't know GTO in the first place.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So the next question after the answer to all those questions is yes, then we have to ask how strong the read is. Okay, and as in the stronger our read on our opponent, the further we can deviate. Right, the larger adjustment we can make to our own strategy. Right, and a lot of people think that population reads are useful, but most of the time they're just not. Right, all the time the population, on average, actually plays a lot closer to GTO than you would think. But individuals, right, are making the wrong plays, which are very poor deviations, which end up losing against GTO. But against any specific deviation from GTO, GTO would win against that. These weak plays from the population, on average, more than a specific read, more than a specific deviation would. I don't know if I explained that properly. Let me try to explain it again.
Yeah, an example. I mean, for me, an example would be if the population is playing near GTO, you could have some people that are overfolding and some people that are underfolding, and on average, they're folding at the right frequency.
Yep. That's basically it, right? A lot of players actually, depending on the population reads, right, the population actually plays, on average, pretty close to GTO on the very common lines, right? And as you get further and further up stakes, they play a lot closer to GTO on especially the very common lines, and they start playing closer to GTO on even less common lines as well, right? So population reads might not be useful, and they often aren't useful for the very common lines. But for lines which aren't so common, they can actually be very useful. But overall, having a population read shouldn't actually impact our play very much. As well as small samples. So if the sample size is small, it's often just unreliable, because just natural variation based on the cards that players are dealt over that sample could be misinterpreted as a read, even though they're actually playing GTO, right, or they're playing close to GTO, you might misread that. And so if you can construct a strategy based on seeing that your opponent only value bet this session, but they could just be dealt the top of their range this session, right? And so then you're always falling to them, and you don't have the opportunity to readjust your strategy because you never see their whole cards anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so often small samples, just you can't use them. And so with these weak reads from a small sample or a population read, we won't be making a very large adjustment from GTO.
Mm-hmm. So for the population reads, like when you say common lines, do you mean like in a check flop and in the bet turn? Do you mean something like that, or do you just mean like a one stat, like small blind fold to, I mean a big blind fold to small blind open, or is it like both of them?
Well, what's the most common lines, do you think? Right, so say we open on the button and we get called by the big blind.
Mm-hmm.
Big blind checks, button C bets.
Big blind checks, button C bets, stuff like that.
Yeah. But then like what about like
turn comes, right? All is pretty common.
Okay.
And so your population reads in those specific spots aren't going to be very good.
Okay. But what about just like
yeah?
But what about just like a single stat, like big blind fold to small blind open, or like button fold to big blind 3-bet or something like that? Should those ones, because those happen kind of frequently, so would those ones be kind of useful or no, or you just still stay no?
So the difference between a population read. So population read is when like you're playing anonymously, or you've just started playing. You don't have any reads on the specific players at the table.
Mm-hmm.
You just know something about the population.
Oh, okay. So it's not based on like stats or anything, I guess.
No, it's not based on it. It's not based on specific statistics about your opponent.
Oh,
or
okay. Just like
your opponents have played, or any history about any specific opponent. It's about the population in general.
Oh, okay. It's just like some
Right.
some stuff people say, I guess, right?
Yeah. So something
Oh,
like
okay.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Or you're playing anonymous or on Ignition or Zoom or something like that on PokerStars. Um, the population might do X, Y, Z, but that specific read isn't very strong, and so it shouldn't really impact our play. But if we have specific reads on specific opponents, then we can use that to update our strategy from GTO to a specific exploitative line. All right.
Yeah.
So one, it can't just be a population read, and two, it has to be a sufficiently large sample in order for us to think it's reliable, right?
Yeah. Okay.
If you've only played 100 hands against the guy, you can't say anything about their full bet frequency, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yep. That makes sense. Yeah.
All right. So after all of that, so we've gone through our decision tree, and now we have a read which we think is relatively strong and reliable. Then we go and evaluate the strategic options in terms of a deviation. All right. So once we know the GTO play is, what the GTO play is, then we can use these reads to figure out what a deviation might be. And it's not just the deviation in terms of fold, call, or raise. We also need to think about specific sizing that we're going to be using. So bet sizing is an important consideration when we're thinking about our exploits. All right, so moving on to facing a bet or raise on the river. All right, so on the river, everything is actually a lot easier to think about, right? So we know GTO against a bet, right? So against this bet, we know what GTO is. We know roughly where our opponent's weakest value hand would be, right? So then hands weaker than that value hand are going to be pure bluff catchers. Hands stronger than that are going to be plus EV calls, right? And so all the pure bluff catchers will be between our opponent's weakest value hand and our opponent's strongest bluff, right? And then we have to fold our pure bluff catchers accordingly. But when we're exploiting, if we know that our opponent overbluffs, then we can fold all of our pure bluff catchers. I mean, sorry, if our opponent overbluffs, then we're just going to call all of our pure bluff catchers, or if our opponent underbluffs, then we fold all of our pure bluff catchers. And it's not just more or less, it's all of them, right? Depending on the strength of our read, right? If our read isn't very strong, then yeah, you can argue about whether or not you're going to call more or a little bit more or fold a little bit more because you don't know. Your read isn't very strong. I'm just going to have a stab in the dark and make this exploit. But oftentimes, that small change in your own strategy, folding a little bit more or calling a little bit more, isn't that far from GTO to start off with, right? It's actually very, very close to GTO. But when you're actually making a true exploit, when you know that your opponent is overbluffing, you know that your opponent is underbluffing, you fold everything if they underbluff, right? You fold all the pure bluff catchers. Your pure bluff catchers could represent 30% of your range, right? Or 2/3 of your calling range in GTO, and you'll just fold all that because it's 0 EV to start off with against GTO. But since they're underbluffing, they're suddenly all minus EV. So you're folding a lot. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So when you're making an
Yeah.
exploit on the river with your pure bluff catchers, you're folding all of them or none of them, right? So that's why you have to be very confident in your read to start off with, because then you're going to make this all or nothing decision about whether all your bluff catchers are calling or all your bluff catchers are folding, not just some of them based on how strong they are. Does anyone have any questions about that before we continue?
I guess for those of us who play live, I mean, we all have, the player at the table we play with regularly who, takes big pride in being overly aggressive and bluffing a lot and putting people at difficult spots and tends to be over bluffing. So, I mean, in that situation, it's basically, if you got your bluff catcher, you got to call him down. As difficult as it may feel, you got to call him down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if your read is strong, and you know what GTO is, and you know you have a pure bluff catcher, and your read is strong at the over bluff, right? Even if it's like really, really scary to do, right? You just call, right? You shouldn't be scary, right? You should separate yourself from the money in front of you, right? And just focus more on making the correct decision rather than think, oh, this is a really big bet, I should fold. No, they're over bluffing.
That statement right there, Thomas, I mean, as true as it is, that psychologically, it's probably one of the most difficult decisions in poker, at least for me.
Yeah, okay. Well, if psychologically, then maybe consider mixing the current stake that you're playing with a lower stake until you get over that.
Yeah, I mean, I got to get to the mindset where it's just chips and not money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
But basically, if you know your opponent's over bluffing, then you know that your expected value to call is positive, right? You just have to suck up the variance and call, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask, so even if I think my opponent's over bluffing a little bit, like I should just still call everything, right?
Well, if you know your opponent's over bluffing by a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If I know, yeah. So even calling just a little bit more, that's not like a true exploit because like it's probably not that. You're saying it's not that far off from GTO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So like it's how strong your read is, right? So if you know your opponent is over bluffing by a little bit, then you should call everything because everything is plus EV to call.
Mm-hmm. But then you said even if you don't do that and you just only overcall like a little bit, like whatever that may be, like it's not actually like you're not actually like exploiting them. Like it's not.
You would only do that if the read wasn't very strong.
Oh, okay.
Right, as in you're unsure, but you're pretty sure. Right, you're not entirely sure if your opponent's over bluffing. If you know your opponent's over bluffing, even by a little bit, then you should always call.
Yeah. Okay. And then if you think they're over bluffing, you just call a little bit more, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's the difference. That's the difference.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
So I have a question here. If we know they under bluff, so it means that we should fold our entire bluff catchers.
Well, you should fold all of your pure bluff catchers. There are some bluff catchers which will beat their value range, which will be plus EV to call in GTO, and some of the weaker ones from them might be 0 EV against an opponent who under bluffs.
Right, because there is always a chance that the opponent could be overplaying or betting a worse value hand. That is why it makes us fold less.
Well, if they bet a worse value hand, right? So you know what GTO is, right? So you know what your opponent should be playing at GTO.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then you can think about how far your opponent's weakest quote unquote hand in their ranges, right? So you can set up all of your opponent's hands, and you can just decide based on your equity against their betting range whether or not it's greater than or less than your pot odds, right? It's difficult to do on the table unless you're pretty experienced with having these equity estimations in your head, right? Which no one does, but you can think about it, right? How many combinations do I beat? How many combinations do I lose to? Right? That kind of thing. And then just do the combo counting in your head and then coming to a decision like that.
Okay.
Right. You were just.
This is different from alpha. This is just a pot odd.
Yeah, it's a pot odds thing, right?
Okay.
When you're doing an exploit, you throw alpha out the window, but you should know what it is because you know what the GTO play is.
Yes.
Right. So you should know what the GTO play is, right? Once you know that, you know what alpha is. You know how often you should be calling or folding to prevent your opponent from over bluffing you or under bluffing you, etc. But if you have a read, you can throw that out the window and focus more on whether or not you're making a plus EV or minus EV call against your opponent's betting range.
Okay.
So you have to know what GTO play is in order to make this exploit.
I usually, when I want to decide on the river in the toughest spot, people, if I try, first of all, I try to find bluffs for my opponent, because some opponents play their value hands in a weird way, because if they're passive or they're not good players, they try to become tricky with their value hands. So they pick up weird lines, and the lines that are very unorthodox. So the first thing I try to do is to find bluffs to see how complicated his bluff should be, because when I run the solver, I see on some spots the bluffs are very difficult to bluff because the candidate bluff. For example, the solver, if the other position player check calls the flop and leads the turn, the bluffs that of the in position player are many overcards. And I don't see that much of a bluff tendency in the live pool. So I tell myself how hard it is to bluff in this spot, or how easy it is to bluff. Yes, if there is flush draw on the flop, everybody can bluff. But when we get to the river, uh, finding bluffs gets more difficult. So the first thing I do, I try to see if I can find enough bluffs for him. And if I cannot, then I become very conservative in calling, and tend to overfold. Uh, this is the first thing. But most people, yes, you gotta know how many hands he's value betting. But most of the times, we just don't know what hands he's value betting, or what hands he's picking this line with, like check raising river and stuff like that. But finding bluffs has been helping me so far.
Yeah, okay, well, but that goes back to your understanding of how far they're divvying from GTO to start with, right?
Yes.
As in, like, how strong your read is. If your read is very strong against your opponent, right? If you know that your opponent can't possibly be bluffing here, then you would just fold everything, right?
Yes.
Or it's just very, very hard for a human to do that, then just fold everything. And that's okay for you to do, right? Remember, you're only thinking about calling with a pure bluff catcher to start with to make your opponent indifferent, right? Your hand was zero EV against a GTO opponent, or against a very strong opponent. Your hand was zero EV to start with.
Yes.
And now you're playing against a non-GTO opponent, right? You should just make decisions based on whether you think that you're making money or losing money against this bet, right? And if your opponent just can't have any bluffs here, you just fold everything, right? You fold all of your pure bluff catchers as well as some of the hands which would beat his GTO value range.
The other concept that makes me sometimes convince myself to a call is that the EV of a bad fold is way more than the EV of a bad call. So if I make a bad call on the river, and like my opponent has bet pot into pot, so every two bad call I make is equal to the EV of making a bad fold. That is why I tend to make calls on the river more often, because I know that for example, if I make this bad call twice, then I have lost equal money of if I make a bad fold, or I get bluffed off.
Yeah, okay, so that's a really fallacious way of thinking. Yeah, just don't think like that. The EV of calling is decided by the range that they're betting, right? Just because you call and you win two pot, and you call and you lose one pot. That doesn't matter. What matters more is the range that they're betting. Okay, that's the most important thing, right? The way of thinking, I call, I only lose one pot if I lose, but I win two pot if I win. Right? Well, you know that's your pot odds. Okay, and then you just have to decide whether your opponent's range gives you a plus EV call or a minus EV call. So the EV is actually decided before you put the chips in, right? So you should decide what you think your EV is before you put your chips in, and then if it's a plus EV call, you would call. If it's a minus EV call, you would fold.
But I'm saying the loss that we suffer from.
No, what you're describing is just pot odds.
Right. Right. So
So don't confuse that with your actual EV, right?
okay.
So don't think that way. That's just it's a bad way of thinking.
Oh,
Okay, because you're
okay.
just gonna end up over calling because the price is cheap, right?
Right.
You should be thinking about what are my pot odds now. So I know what pot odds, I can calculate that, and then I can think about my opponent's range, whether they're over bluffing, under bluffing, right? Whether they're bluffing enough based on the pot odds.
I see. Maybe I said myself wrong. I'm saying the amount we lose if we make a mistake in calling or folding. This amount, if we make a bad call.
Yep. So it goes back to the second question, right? Do I know what GTO plays in this spot? And the answer to that is no. Then you should just learn what GTO play is.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. So if you can't answer this question, then everything from now on is just going to be like you don't know whether you're making the right decision or not. Just play as best you can, right? And then afterwards, go and learn what GTO plays for that spot.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that answer? I don't know if that answers that question. I don't mean to sound condescending or anything. It's just that sort of way of thinking is going to lead you to make a lot more mistakes than than you would, right? So it's this whole decision tree, right? So we started off about whether or not we played GTO up into the spot. So whether or not we played GTO up into the river, and now if we have played GTO up into the river, do I know what the GTO play is now, right, against this bet? And if I know what the GTO play is against this bet for both players, I know that I have pure bluff catcher or whatever, and my opponent's betting range should look something like this. And now I use my read. Do I have a read? If not, if I don't have a read, then I just play GTO. If I do have a read, I apply this read. Do I think that my opponent is playing GTO? Right? How far away from GTO do I think my opponent is playing? Do I think that my opponent will be betting these hands for value and bluffing these kinds of hands for value? Right? If my opponent is over bluffing, then I'm just going to call all my pure bluff catchers. If my opponent is under bluffing, then I'm just going to fold all my pure bluff catchers plus a bit more. Does that make sense? So it's you filtering all your decisions through this decision tree. You're not by filtering all your decisions through this decision tree, you haven't made any mistakes in your thought process.
Okay.
I had a question about the decision tree actually. So what if like we don't know what the GTO play is, but I know like this guy, like I saw him like 5 hands in a row, he showed down like some crazy airball bluff. So
well, you don't really know if you don't know what the GTO play is, then you don't know whether or not your exploit is going to be correct to start off with.
okay.
So you're playing as best as you can, right? Given that you don't know GTO. If you sort of know what the ballpark is about GTO, the ballpark of GTO, then you can use that. But if you don't know what GTO is at all, you're completely lost, then you can't really do anything. Just play as best you can.
Okay, but okay.
Just assume that the play that you make is wrong, and then look up what the GTO play is later on off the table, and then make the correct decision about your exploit off the table, even though you lost $1,000 or whatever while you play that hand.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Right. If you don't know what GTO is now, you can't do anything now to change that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. But
so just play as best you can.
Okay. So if like let's say I had like on the river, I just had like a weak showdown value hand, right? Like I wouldn't know versus like a small bet if it's a call or fold. Like I don't really know what the GTO plays, right? Just like it's kind of murky, I guess. But let's say I know, but I know the guy I'm playing against, like he's kind of crazy. So would that count as Me just shooting in the dark, I guess.
Yeah, you're shooting in the dark. So
Okay.
like you don't know what the correct play is in
Mhm.
terms of GTO, and so your exploit isn't going to make any sense to start with, right?
Oh yeah. Oh okay.
So you're literally at that stage just gambling. So play as best you can.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
All right. So does this all make sense for facing a bet or raise on the river? Because when we move to an earlier street, it's going to get a bit murky. So does everyone understand what this is?
On the river, yeah, that makes sense for me. Yeah.
All right. So we've gotten to this decision on the river based on our decision tree. We tried to play close to GTO so far, right? And now we can think about whether or not we want to deviate, right? So this assumes that we have played GTO so far, and we haven't decided to deviate up until now, right? And so we've left our deviation to this river decision based on our opponent's reads, right? Based on reads we have on our opponent, right? Say our flop and turn reads aren't very strong, but our river reads are pretty strong. So then we can apply these river reads to this river spot. All right, so moving on to facing a bet on an earlier street. So on earlier streets, value and bluffs aren't as easily defined, right? Some hands will be part value and part bluff. Some bluffs will have the ability to outdraw all the hands in your range, and some bluffs, quote unquote bluffs, will have so much equity. The EV in GTO is actually all in the pot, so they're actually value betting. But when we're facing a bet, say on the flop or the turn, overall, it's just the strength of the betting range that's important, right? Specifically, whether the strength of the betting range is strong or weak, right? Whether it's got a lot of strong hands in it, a lot of weak hands in it. And we can also look at our opponent's aggression, as in how often they're going to be continuation betting, and their polarity. And also we have to think about bet sizing as well. So all these different things have to come together in order to evaluate our decisions on when we're facing a bet on an earlier street.
So may I have a question from the last chart, previous chart? So you're saying the strength of the betting range. In multi-wet pots, if somebody is betting, they are having either value hands or semi-bluffs. And the semi-bluffs are usually the high equity ones that like they should be drawing to the nuts, like in terms of if there's a flush draw or something. So the strength of their betting range is very strong. Does this mean that if we know someone is betting with the value hands or very strong draws, we should overfold versus that range? Or we should call and see if their bluffs get there on the turn?
Yeah, multi-way pots are a bit different. So first, with multi-way pots, you have to understand what the multi-way theory is, and then like know what the GTO looks like in multi-way pots, right? So a lot of the time, you just don't know what GTO is in the multi-way pot, right? So you have to go and try and figure that out.
Let's say we are playing heads up, and the player has this tendency that he's not betting polar. He's choosing to have his bluffs toward the top of the equity graph. So the bluffs are semi-bluffs.
Yeah. So we'll get to that. So the range strength. So now we're heads up, right? So the heads up is a lot easier of a decision because we know what the GTO play is, right, for both players. So we know what GTO is, and we have a read on our opponent that our opponent is just betting hands from the top of their range, right? Betting all the strong hands and then checking back all the weak ones, right? So their betting range is very strong. All right, so they have a very strong betting range, and so we should just fold, regardless of what size. We should overfold regardless of what bet size they use. Even though they use a very small bet size with a very strong range, we should just look to overfold. Right? So the range has to have some weaker hands in it in order for us to want to continue.
If we know if they are draw heavy, why we shouldn't call and see the next street to see if the draws get there? I have seen many players with this tendency. They don't pick sophisticated bluffs with backdoors. They just go straight with their draws, straight draws or flush draws, or they made hands. So why?
Yeah, usually when they do stuff like that, it does become a lot easier to play against, right? Because you can make that exploit. But a lot of the time, when they're doing something like that, they're just under bluffing in general, right? Because only using all the flush draws isn't enough for them to have a weak enough range, right? Their range is too strong if they just have all flush draws as their bluffs, and then like top pair type hands to continue with, right? The range is too strong.
Yeah, because their value range could be well ahead of the hands you're calling with.
Yes, but they barrel with their draws, and we could, like, I can comfortably call my top pair and see if on the turn there's a brick, and his bluffs didn't get there, then maybe I'm bluff catching on that spot. Why should I let my weak top pair go on the flop only because he has a strong betting range?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first off, you have to know what the GTO play is, and then like sort of whether or not your calling range is, whether or not the hand that you want to call with is 0 EV to call. And all the time on the flop, like a top pair hand, because of the fact that it blocks your opponent's top pairs, is like massively plus EV to call your opponent's bet, right? So you're not going to be able to deviate that far in terms of like so far that you're just going to fold all your top pairs, because your top pair just blocks so much of your opponent's value range.
Okay.
But it's sort of like the weaker hands, right? Hands like a middle pair or just a middle pair, bottom pair, like draw kind of hand, right? Where these hands are close to 0 EV to call against your opponent's bet in GTO. And now you can think about whether or not you want to exploit them by making a change from GTO. But in general, the stronger that your opponent's betting range is, the more we should fold, right? If they're only bluffing the strongest possible draws, right? Say there's a flush draw on and they're only bluffing flush draws, then we should overfold, because they're not bluffing enough if they're only bluffing flush draws. Their betting range is too strong. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I once I checked with solver versus the player like this. Yes, we should overfold, but we should go all in. I see this huge sizing that solver chooses, that versus a player like this, because he's betting the top of his range. We should come over the top with our made hands right there, because they're not folding their flush draws or their made hands on that spot. So the adjustment is to overfold and then raise huge with our made hands.
Yep. So yeah, that's against a player that they've played poorly they've played poorly at that node in the tree, and then will play for some reason GTO from thereafter. So that's how you play it. But all players won't do that, right? They won't just play bad at one specific spot in the game tree and then suddenly play GTO after that. Does that make sense?
No, I didn't. So you're saying on a specific node of the tree they only play bad, but
yeah. So you've node locked them. So a node lock basically means that this is my opponent's strategy for this specific node in the tree. So lock this node, and then they're playing GTO around that node for all the other lines of GTO, all the lines after this are GTO, right? So a lot of players, if they're playing poorly at this specific node in the tree, they're also going to be playing poorly after that, because they're not playing GTO to start with. why should they play GTO after they made this mistake.
Okay, so how we should solve account this in the solver? You should lock other nodes as well.
Yep, that's one way to do it.
Okay.
And often it's difficult to do that because you don't have enough information on your opponent. So often this means that you're just going to be playing close to GTO to start with. But anyway, so they're betting top of their range, and yeah, okay, that's correct. You can just check jam all of your strong hands, right? Because their draws are very strong. But basically, if they have the top of their range when they're betting, right? If they're betting hands that are just close to the top of their entire range, then we should just fold, regardless of which size that they're using. And on the other hand, if they're betting just hands just too weak, right? They're betting more hands from the bottom of their range, then we should just call or raise more and fold less. So does anyone else have a question about this thing before we move on? Just like the range strength bit?
No, I'm good for me.
All right. So the next bit is aggression, as in once your opponent is bet, how often are they going to bet the next street, or if they're going to raise the street if we decide to raise. And often if our opponents are too aggressive on later streets, we can exploit them by trapping more of our strong hands, right? If our opponent isn't, if our opponent, once they decide to bet, they're just going to barrel a lot, then when we have a strong hand, we should just trap, right? If say we flop a set, so we have pocket sevens and where we call a bet in the big blind against a button open, and the flop is king 7-2. If we know that opponent is just going to bet and barrel a lot with their top pair hands, then we should check and call, but not raise our pocket sevens. A set of sevens there. Right? So we should just check call because we know that our opponent is going to bet the next street too often. Does that make sense?
Yeah, whereas the GTO play is one based on bet size. I mean, the smaller the bet size, you would tend to raise that hand early to get your value early on. And then also take into account whether the opponent is likely to bet the next street. Like if it's a fairly draw heavy board, or I mean that's the GTO line. So what you're saying is that if they tend to be overly aggressive, then you can just call and trap them on a later street.
Yeah, also in GTO, even on this dry flop that Thomas said, if SPR is big, we are going to be raising our sets on the flop right there most of the times.
Right.
Yeah, so you're going to be raising your set a lot. But if your opponent is too aggressive in that once they bet the flop, they like to bet the turn, or one of the turn. Once they bet the turn, they like to bet the river. We should just delay our raises with our strong hands to the next street, because not only do we win their bet on this street, but we also win the bet on the next street as well. So if we're playing against a player that likes to continuation bet, the what's it? Top 1% is a book by I can't remember who, and the other book by Split Suit or whatever his name is, where you bet 70% of your range on each street, and check 30%. Against a player like that, the best way to play with like a very strong hand is just trap all of your strong hands and then raise the river. Does that make sense? A lot of the time, they should just be checking back. Once they bet the flop, they should be checking back the turn, right? That should be the majority. That should be the line that's taken most often, betting the flop and then checking back the turn, right, should be the line that's checking most often. But if they're not checking back the turn enough, then we can trap a very strong hand and leave them until they bet the turn. So we've won 2 bets instead of just the one with our check raise.
Yeah, that makes sense for me. Yeah.
All right, and the last one is polarity. Okay, so if we're facing a polar betting range, then we're just not going to raise as much, just for both value and bluffs. And the reason why this is the case is because in GTO, polar ranges are just more aggressive later on. They're just going to see that more often. Okay, versus depolarized ranges, they're going to be betting and then checking back more. So that's why you have to raise, right, to sort of prevent them from checking back the next street, especially if you're on the flop or even especially on the turn as well, right? You just want to prevent them from betting with a depolarized range and then checking back, right? So then they can bet to deny equity and get value, etc., and then check back the next street. If they're depolarized, we want to raise more because they're checking back more often. But if they're polarized, they have a polarized range, they can afford to bet more often on the next street. And notice that I'm just saying polarized and depolarized range and nothing about the bet sizing, because polarity is related to bet sizing, but they're not the same thing. So a player can be far too polar with a small sizing, or they can not be polar enough with a very large sizing. And you have to understand this distinction when you're making your exploits.
So what do you mean by that again, Thomas?
So in general, if they use a very big bet size, they have to be more polar. The strength of their quote unquote value, right? The stronger parts of their range have to be much stronger, and their bluffs also have to be sort of more thoroughly mixed in.
Right.
So may I add something? Like one example of betting polar is that if somebody is betting large, they should have less of like semi bluffs in their range, like monster draws, because monster draws on the flop usually solver does not select the large sizing for them. So if they're betting large, they're betting very strong hands or very weak bluffs. So semi bluffs rarely are assigned in this range. But I have seen players that they play it very aggressively with large sizing because they think they have top pair and flush draw, so they should bet huge, or they have pair and flush draw, they should bet huge. But I rarely see solver chooses large sizing for these kind of draws because they're so good to turn into bluff for this sizing. Also, just adding something for the last part of this. So if they're not polar enough, like the example we had that the betting range is very strong, if they're betting with the top of their range, so they're not polar there as well. So we can adjust by raising, but we cannot adjust by raising more often. It depends how this not polar range is distributed. If it is toward value, then we should avoid raising more often because we run into their strong range.
Well, you can raise more often as a percentage of your continuing. So, like, think about preflop, right? So all the preflop solves that we have are just with one preflop raise size. Okay, so if your opponent is just using one preflop raise size with all of their hands, we would see that in the big blind, the larger the bet size, the larger the raise size that they use preflop, the more often we're 3-betting. And conversely, the smaller preflop raise size, the less we're 3-betting. It's the same kind of thing, right? It's the case where they're not polar enough with a large bet size, and so we can adjust by raising more. Okay, this is with the strength of the range being the same.
Okay, I got you.
So we can fold more and raise more, right? Because their range is stronger than it should be and less polar than it should be. So we fold more and raise more. And that's the preflop adjustment. And so we can think about the same kind of thing post-flop. Did my statement about the preflop stuff make sense to everybody?
Yes, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because if you've seen my preflop ranges, it's all sort of assuming that they're only using one preflop raise size for their entire range. But when you're playing against players which are using multiple preflop raise sizes, then you'll see that more often the big blind just has to call more and raise less against the large sizes, and then raise more and call less against the small sizes. But most players just can't. Humans just aren't good enough to be able to split their preflop raise sizes and their ranges to each size properly. So you can just adjust by assuming that they're only using one size for their preflop strategy. All right, so the three things that we've discussed, right? Range strength, aggression, and polarity. Let's have a look at some examples. Yeah.
Actually, I have a quick question about the polarities. Okay.
Yep.
So when you say villain is not polar enough for their bet size, you can raise more, right? So let's say like if on an early street, if villain bets like pot with like a middle pair, that's enough for us to start raising the size? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean exactly by that, but just in general, whether if their range isn't polar enough for their bet size.
Okay, so let's say like villain's betting for a pot size, right? With like let's say a lot of strong hands and like low equity hands, and then he has a few like middle strength hands, like a middle pair or something. So are you saying we should raise that? Is that
Well,
clear?
it means that you can raise that.
Yeah.
Right. If they're betting very large size, but their range isn't as polar as it should be, then we can raise more and then fold more. Right.
Okay.
So we should fold more because the bet size is very big,
Mm-hmm.
and we can raise more because they have more weaker hands in their range.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah.
All right, so let's have a look at this example. So going back to King 7-2 between the big blind and the button. So this is a strategy for the button, and say we're in the big blind, right? So we have this range to start off with. Do this, and then they bet, right? So we can think about which hands we're going to raise, right? And we can make adjustments based on what our opponent is doing, right? So they're betting this very small size with their entire range, is what they should be doing. But if your opponent, for whatever reason, actually allocates some hands to a larger bet size, right? If they bet their entire range for a larger bet size rather than just like this min bet, then what do you think the exploit is going to be?
Call less, fold more, raise more.
Yep.
Where did this go? Let's close this for now. Yeah, call more, raise more, right? Because they're using a larger size with a range which isn't as polar as it should be. So we should fold more and then raise more. So we know what the GTO play is here. It's raise only like 9% of hands. But if they're doing larger size with the entire range, we should raise even more, right? And we should fold even more. So that means that we should fold more like of these like weird floats, which are 0 EV. So we should fold all these 0 EV floats and then raise a lot more of our strong hands. Right, so you raise 7-7 more and then raise some other hands for bluffs like King Queen for value and some other hands as well. Okay. Now, All right, so say we face the small bet, and we know that our opponent, once they bet the flop, right, their betting range on the turn here is going to be just on average, say something like 60%. So once they bet the flop, they're going to bet the turn 60% of the time. What adjustment do you think we would want to make with the hands in our range?
Good in trapping. The double barrel is high frequency.
Yeah, very good, right? So we're going to trap more, right? So these 7-7-2-2 hands aren't going to be raised right now, and like the king queen isn't going to be raised right now. We're going to be calling more of the strong hands with the intention of trapping. So let's have a look at an example, right? So say we call when the turn is a jack. The betting frequency is like less than 40, and when they do bet, they overbet. But if you're against an opponent that doesn't know how to overbet, and so they're pushing all these hands down, and then pushing some of these hands up, and now their betting frequency is like 60, 70% on the turn, right? You would trap on the flop with your 7-7-2-2, and now raise it on this turn instead, right? You can actually still do the same thing with, you can actually play your bluffs at GTO, right? Your values just play differently.
Oh, okay.
Right, so just because you're adjusting your value to your opponent's strategy doesn't mean that you have to adjust your bluffs.
So you're saying the way that we play our value hands by trapping, we should not playing our bluff the same way? Like, I'm gonna bluff. If there are some bluffs that I want to do right now on the flop, I should postpone those bluffs on the turn, or no?
No. You can just be unbalanced right now and just move the value from raising to calling, and then raising later on.
And you don't have to worry about being balanced when you raise later on because you're exploding.
Yeah, because you're exploiting, right? Once you know that you're exploiting, once you've made a decision to deviate from GTO, you don't have to worry about being balanced. You have to worry more about winning as much EV as you can against your opponent's strategy.
Yes, but the only thing that I have faced myself on these spots is that, yes, I have tried to win more, so I have put more focus on my value hands, and now at the some spot in the hand, I have lost my range because I have been only picking that line with my value hands, and now something unexpected has happened. So I don't know how to defend on that spot because I have lost my range. Like here, 8-6 suited, for example, is a raise a lot of time. So if I, let's say, or not, maybe not, it's not an example. So I'm saying, like, if I postpone my value hands on the later street, and then something happens that I don't expect, like I face a 3-bet or something, now I don't know how to defend because I'm unbalanced and I have lost my range.
Okay, so if you're exploiting, you don't have to worry about being balanced, right? Just try and figure out what the best size is. Okay, so let's say they bet half pot and then you have sevens and then you raise and then you face a 3-bet, which they shouldn't be 3-betting. So you face a 3-bet, like you should still know what GTO looks like, right? And where that hand is going to fit into GTO, right? So all of the time, the decision here, you're indifferent between calling and raising, but now you just decide to call everything, right? You still had played GTO up until then. And so if you know what GTO play is for that hand, then you can use that still, right? Here, sevens is like indifferent, and like king jack, which is top 2 pair, is not against the 3-bet.
Right.
Okay, so you still know what GTO play is, right? Even though you're exploiting, you can still use that to help you out. But most of the time, once you're exploiting, you should just continue with your exploit, right? You should know enough about your opponent's strategy to exploit them as best you can, right, going forward. Anyway, so yeah, the half pot, and now you raise the sevens. Okay. All right. Does anyone have? Yeah.
Yeah, just one question. So if we're playing our bluffs at GTO, so say we're going to check raise 8-6 suited with a backdoor flush draw of some frequency on King 7G rainbow, but we're never check raising our value, like our sets. Then once we get to the turn, and say we pick up a backdoor flush draw, we're going to continue betting that. Then we essentially have no value hands in our range when we're betting that turn card.
Well, you can play your bluffs as if you were playing GTO. All right, and the EV for them should be the same, right? Unless, because if when you're exploiting, you don't have to worry about being balanced anymore. You just have to worry about making the best play with that hand. I'm going to talk about bluff betting and bluff raising now.
Okay.
Right, but if your only read is that your opponent likes to barrel, then you can trap your strong hands and not worry about being balanced when you in your check raise line.
Okay.
Right, you can just play your bluffs the same way.
Can we say when we are exploiting, we should not think about range versus range analysis anymore?
Well, you should already know what it is, right? So
Okay.
you have to have known GTO to get here, right? So you have to know the GTO play for all your hands, up until the spot, and then thinking about the GTO play continuing on, in order to exploit properly. Does that make sense to everybody? It goes back to the decision tree at the very start. Okay, and this is sort of why exploiting is so hard, right? Because like if you don't know question number 2, or if you don't know question number 1, or if question number 3 is a bit iffy, right? Then suddenly you've put yourself in a spot where you don't know what to do because you've deviated and you didn't know what the follow-up for that deviation is. Does that make sense? So you're following through this, right? You're just looking at like the specific hand in front of you. The rest of your range can actually just continue playing GTO, if you don't want to make an exploit with those hands.
Okay, so we go hand versus his range. That are a specific hand there.
Well, yeah, you should already know what the range versus range. You should know what the range versus range analysis is already, and then you can change your play with that specific hand in front of you, and that's what's going on here.
Gotcha.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions about facing a bet or raise on an earlier street?
I'm good for me. I'm good.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to bluff betting and bluff raising. Okay, so when we're making an exploit with a bluff bet or a bluff raise, it's entirely dependent on how often our opponent is going to fold. So if opponent is going to fold a lot, then we can bluff them more. And if opponent is going to fold a lot in a specific against a specific bet size, then we can just allocate all of our hands into that bet size. On the other hand, if they're just not going to fold to any bet size very often enough of the time, then we should never bluff at all, or we can check back our entire bluffing range, and just go more for value. So if they fold to a specific bet size more often than they should, say they fold to another bet more often than they should, or to an under bet more often than they should, then this means that we can just be very unbalanced and just use that size and hammer that into them.
One question. If we allocate all of our bluffs to that specific size, then are we prone to overbluffing?
Well, okay, so remember you're exploiting.
Okay, got you. Yeah. So
So you have to worry about being balanced.
right. So I have seen players fold top pair on the river if we bet 200, 300% of the pot. They really have tough time. They fold their cards and they show the top pair. So does this mean I can overbluff with that size and never bet like 1/3 of the pot, because they always call their top pair with 1/3 of pot? but they fold the entire top pair, most of their top pairs, to a 300 pot bet size.
Yep. So you just put all your bluffs into the. So any hand which you would consider a bluff, you would just put it straight into the 200, 300% bet size. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You just put all your bluffs there.
Does this only apply for the river or on early streets?
No, it can apply on early streets. So let's have a look at an example. So king, queen, 7 with the queen, 7 suited. So let's have a look at the 2x pot over bet and how they're playing against that. So they're folding some top pairs and like middle pairs, and then like weak pairs, right? But overall, their folding frequency against 2x pot over bet is around 75%. Okay, so then you can think about whether or not your opponent is folding enough or whether they're folding too much. So it's against a 2x pot over bet. I'm just going to get power called out so I can show you guys. The range. All right, so it looks like that. Okay, so 75% is the folding frequency. All right, and we are on. Okay, so you can just think about what kind of exploit you want to make, right? So say your opponent just calls with just top pair, and then like folds top pair or better, and then folds everything else, right? Hang on, wrong flop. Okay, so calling all that, and they're calling that, and they're calling that, and that, and then yeah. So if they're just calling top pair or better, then they're calling at 15%, so they're folding at 85%. So they're folding at 85%, right, instead of 75%. Then what our bluffs, the profit that our bluffs make in terms of the percentage of the pot is just going to be the overfolding percentage divided by the percentage that they should have called, right? So if they should have called at 25%, then they're overfolding by 9%, so it's going to be 9 over 25. And so we win 0.36 of the pot by overbetting all of our bluffs, which is a lot, right? So probably haven't stretched it well enough, but they just need to call more than just top pair better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they need to call a lot more than that. And they also have to have some raises, which is kind of good as well. All right, because they're not raising you, then your bluffs do even better. Now, does it make sense to everybody?
Yeah, but like, what would like the nut flush draw? Would that count as a bluff or a value bet, or like would you put that in the size they overfold, or would you put that in the size they call?
Okay, so this is your EV, right? So 0.36 times a pot, and the pot's 4.5. You can just bet any hand whose EV is less than 1.62.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So you just look at the EV of the hand. Okay.
Yeah. So you can look at the EV of the hands in GTO, and then like a lot of them, all the ones down here, right, are going to be pretty low. And so like all these 1 things, and so you can checking EV is 1, and so you can just move all of them into the betting range for 2x pot.
Okay. Yeah. And can you just quickly show how did you get the EV?
Yeah. So the EV just from them folding, right? This is excluding our ability to outdraw them. Okay, yeah. So our EV is going to be high if we outdraw them, just from folding, right? So they should be calling it 25%. Okay. But they're only calling 16%, which means they're overfolding by 9%. And so the EV that we win from them overfolding is going to be 9 over 25.
Oh, okay. So it's the yeah.
So it's the amount that they overfold divided by the total amount that they should call.
Okay.
And that's our total EV just from them folding, right? We can also have some extra EV if we can outdraw some of our opponent's hands.
Okay, yeah.
So
That makes
can I
sense.
add something here? In terms of a small betting on the flop, yes, I know that many live players overcall their small bets, but this makes their range very weak on the river, that now we can bluff them on the river. So this is a chain of events. So we bet a small on the flop, knowing they're gonna overcall, and then we bet a small on the turn, knowing they're gonna overcall the turn, and now they have a very weak range on the river, so we can overbet the river. So all I'm trying to say is that because they overcall on earlier street, it doesn't necessarily mean we should underbluff on earlier street, because we can make them reach to the river with a weak range by this trick. Like quarter a pot, 200% pot, for example. Because they're overcalling.
All right, so it's like quarter pot, right? I don't know. It's actually pretty hard, I think, for players to overfold against a quarter pot bet, right? They just have to be floating like all the ace high.
Yeah, they overcall. That's what I'm saying. I know they're overcall with a quarter a pot, but I still bet because this makes their range weak on later streets. So I can bluff them on the later street. So one adjustment is that because I know they're overcall, I don't bet, I don't have bluffs in my quarter a pot bets. Another adjustment is that I know they're overcall, but I can steal the pot on the later street. So I stick to GTO, all the sizing for quarter a pot, but then they have a weak range, weaker than GTO range on next street. So I can bluff them on next street.
Yeah, that's okay. Have I played GTO so far? Yes. Do I know what GTO play is? Yes. Do I have reads? Yes. How strong is my read? Very strong. And then do that, right? So as long as you've played GTO so far with that bluff, then you can do it, right?
Okay. So
the exploit is actually on that street. You really shouldn't just go out of your way in order to get to that spot, right? With your bluffs, you should try and play them in a balanced range, in sort of like the correct way. Just don't. You shouldn't really go out of your way to put your opponent into a spot like that. Okay, so you can ignore a read and play GTO, and then use a read later. But it's sort of like you have to make the decision of how strong your read is that they're just going to overcall the flop, right? And a lot of the time, it's just if you want to act on your read on the flop, right? You should. Okay, you should just not bluff. It comes to like an EV estimation of how much EV you're going to win by this river overbet if their flop and turn ranges are weak. You have to weigh that up.
So maybe
a lot of the time, they're actually playing a lot closer to GTO than you think, right? So you bet quarter pot and they float with some ace highs, which is okay, and they float with all their flush draws. Like, do you really expect them to float on the king queen 7 with jack high, maybe with the backdoor diamonds? But I don't know if they're going to float that either. But they have jack 8 with the backdoor diamonds, so they're not too far floating some of these hands, right? And then it's a 2, and it goes to check, and then you decide to bet quarter pot or half pot again, and then they just float a lot again, right? And then they get to the river.
This might be more often true on the multi-way pot. Maybe the next thing we can discuss in future is exploitative play and multi-way pots, because in multi-way pots, when we need to bet a small on the flop, and then one person calls because it is a small bet, and all the idiots overcall because they think they're getting the prize. So again, we are facing multiple people on next street. But we cannot say because they're calling our small bet because they're overcall, so we shouldn't be bluffing. This is small sizing. You know, I still keep bluffing a small in multi-way pots because this is the GTO play.
Okay, so it goes to decision tree. You have enough information to adjust, and then you know that they're calling too much, and so you should underbluff. You know that your EV, your EV of checking back is going to be really small, right? With your bluff.
Yes.
Okay, so it's going to be something very small, and say it's going to be a tenth of the pot, right? And
Yes.
your bet size is now, so your EV of checking back is a tenth of the pot, and your bet is a quarter of the pot. So you bet and you lose your quarter pot bet because you know that they're called, right? So you're actively making a decision to lose a third of the pot when you bet, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So you're saying betting is better because the EV of checking.
No. So you bet and you lose a quarter pot, which is your bet, and you lose 0.1 of the pot, which is your checking EV, and so you lose 0.35 of the pot by betting.
Oh.
And then you just have to weigh, like, is that 0.35 of the pot worth this ability to bluff my opponent later on? And the answer is probably no, right?
But I look at it like this: if I get called, when I bet quarter a pot, and I just only need 20% equity versus their calling range, maybe more. When I bet quarter pot, I need 1/6 percent equity versus their calling range, which is around maybe 16%.
Well, they could raise you, so that sort of cancels that out.
Yeah, maybe something around 20% because they just call very wide. Even if I bet with some of my overcards, and sometimes my overcards when I hit it is good, then I am kind of realizing my hand by betting a small versus this all passive crowd that they love to call only.
Or you could just check, and then when you hit, it's good, and so...
Okay, I hear you. Sometimes I bet in position, and then I get to see two cards by just 1/4 a pot because everybody calls and they check again to me. Now I check back and I see two cards by betting quarter a pot on the flop.
Okay, well, you have to decide whether or not seeing two cards is worth a quarter of the pot, right? So if your EV in the pot to start with was like 0.1 or 0.05, because you only get to see one card by checking back, right? If you only get to see two cards, it's now going to be so you double that, so 0.05 to 0.1 or 0.1 to 0.2, right? It's still less than the 0.25 which you put in, right? You only win the extra card that you see, but you've lost a quarter of the pot. And the extra card that you see wasn't worth anywhere near the quarter of the pot.
Okay, so you're saying we need more equity to bet like that.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you know that your opponent is not going to fold to your bluffs, then you shouldn't bluff.
How about this? I mean, the reason I'm insisting because my opponent is not folding to this street, but he's going to fold, for example, to 3 barrels. You know, he's not folding flop, he's not folding turn, but when we push him on that river, he's folding. So there are two approaches. The first approach is that just don't bluff on that specific street. The second approach is that you can keep bluffing and putting pressure so you can steal the pot on later streets. They're both two adjustments we can take.
No, well, you have to know how often they're going to be calling. Right, it's a lot more complicated. You have to know a lot more about your opponent in order to get that to work, right? You have to know that your opponent is just going to overcall on the first two streets, right? They're going to overcall on the flop and the turn, and then overfold on the river, right? And you have to judge how often that's going to happen, right? How often they're going to call you on the flop and the turn, and how often they're going to fold on the river, and decide how much EV that you're going to win from that, right? If you can win EV, right? So you might win EV your river bluff might be plus EV because they're overfolding, but your turn and flop bluffs are massively minus EV because they are underfolding. They're calling too often.
I hear you. Okay. All right.
And you have to judge that for yourself, and you can perform some EV estimations, right, either with a solver where you no-lock multiple streets, but it's going to be difficult because you literally just have to no-lock the entire strategy across all possible turns and rivers. Or you can just run it yourself in a calculator, and you can see how much you're risking versus how much you're trying to win back. Okay, so let's have a look at an example, right? So the pot is 1, all right, and you bet quarter pot flop, quarter pot turn, and then like twice the pot in the river, something like that. And you know that they never fold to your flop and turn bet. All right, and on the river, say they fold twice as much as they should. I mean, they call half as much as they should. All right, so then you know that you lose 0.25 on the flop, right, of the flop of the bet on the flop, and you lose 0.5 on the turn. Sorry, not 0.5. So we lose 0.25 on the flop, and we lose 0.25 times 1.5. So we lose 0.625.
Okay, correct.
Okay. And now the river, what's the size of the pot in the river? It's going to be 2.25. All right, and then we're going to win 2.25 and the percentage that they're overfolding, right? So if they're overfolding, so say they should be folding at alpha, which is the 2/3, but instead they're folding at alpha of instead of folding at 2/3, they fold at they call half of that, right? So they fold 80%.
Okay.
You just take 80%. So 20%. You take the amount that they're overfolding by, right? So it's going to be sorry, I should do 2.25 times. Okay, you take the amount that they're overfolding by, right? Which is going to be 80 minus 66.6. Right, and you divide that by 33.3, and we calculate it, and we get a positive EV there. Does that make sense? So that's plus EV if they don't raise and then overfold, and then there's like some other stuff about your checking EV. Right, once you check, right, if your bluff has checking EV on the river, which you're also risking. That makes sense. So it becomes a lot more complicated to calculate.
Okay.
Right, and you have to have a lot more information about your opponent's play in order to do that.
Okay.
Right, so then it goes back to like the question: do I have any reads? How strong is my read? Right, your read has to be really, really strong in order to do that, and make such a complicated adjustment to your own strategy. And a lot of the times, your read isn't strong enough to do that, so you don't do it. Right, it's like playing. It's like actively deciding to play a really weird hand pre-flop just so that when you get lucky, you can win, right? So it's like you're actively trying to open 6-2 suited in the low jack, just so that when you get lucky and hit a straight with your 6-2, you can win a big pot. It doesn't. We all know that that's not the correct way to play, right? For a whole bunch of reasons, right?
Yeah. So one thing
You have to know a lot about your opponents in order to be able to pull that off.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to move on this, but this is my last question on this. If we know, if we get called, we have 20% equity, then can we bet 1/4 of the pot? If we know the equity versus their calling range is our equity versus their calling range is 20%. can we bet 1/4 of the pot with all those hands that have 20% equity versus their calling range? I think the answer is yes.
20% on one street.
Yes, versus their calling range. Yes, from flop to turn.
Okay, so remember you're risking your check back EV, and your check back EV is going to be 0.2. Right, so the folding frequency, in order to make you indifferent to your bet, has to be. They do have to call more in order to make you indifferent.
Okay.
They have to fold less than alpha, and I think I've discussed this in the draw bluffs video.
Yeah.
There's an equation there which you could use, and there's also stuff which you have to think about as well, whether or not they're going to raise you, and how often they're going to raise you, and impact and putting that into your EV as well.
Okay, gotcha.
So if say you knew that they never raised you and your EV was and your equity was 20%, if you bet quarter pot and they never fold, then your EV goes from 0.2, which is your check back EV, to 0, which is your betting EV. So you've lost 0.2 by betting.
All right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so where are we? Yeah, so bluff betting or bluff raising, right? So the 2x pot overbet on the flop, if they're just calling top pair or better, right? If they're not floating like these kinds of hands, which they might be, right? An ace jack, gut shot with a backdoor flush draw might float. But so they're not even floating like ace jack without the backdoor flush draw, then you can go ahead and just overbet because you're making so much with your bluff. So does that make sense to everybody? All right. So value betting or raising. Now, so when we decide to value bet, it's based on how often our opponent's going to continue with a worse hand, as well as how often we're going to get raised, right? So if we have a hand which we know is indifferent to value betting right now because value betting or checking, the decision about whether or not to just raise that hand all the time or check it back all the time often comes down to if your opponent's going to call too often or if your opponent's going to raise not enough, right? So if they're not raising enough, we can value bet more often. We can value bet wider with the intention of just checking back the next street, checking the next street, checking back the next street. So they have to raise enough to keep us indifferent from value betting just super wide. Right, because remember on an earlier street, part of every value bet is also a bet to prevent our opponent from seeing the next street for free. All right, so we'll go back to this example. Say we're looking at the quarter pot bet size. Do we think our opponent is going to be raising this 13-ish% enough of the time, right? If they're going to be raising against our bet of quarter pot, are they going to be raising 13%? You're raising top two, yeah, maybe. A set, yeah, maybe. And then these two pairs, yeah, probably, right? So if we know that, we can think about how to exploit our opponent, right? Is our opponent going to check raise all of their 2 pair plus. Right? Is the opponent going to start check raising us with some top pair and weaker? Right? All these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So if our opponent isn't raising like the king jack some of the time, then this means that for this very small size, we can bet more often for value with our top pairs because we're less likely to get raised. So if we bet and then we get raised, we're obviously going to be calling with our top pairs. But some other hands which would be considered thinner value bets, like a queen X hand, which for this very small size is sort of value bet on the flop. Right, you can see all the queen X's are calling. So that means that a queen X is a thin value bet on the flop. These thin value bets go from being indifferent between betting and checking to just always betting quarter pot because they're not raising enough with their top pair hands.
So one question here, we are playing with an opponent that does not raise enough. So this GTO tells us, I mean, the adjustment is to bet more. And on the other hand, they don't fold enough as well to this quarter pot bet. So the adjustment is to bluff less. If we combine these two, does this mean we should thin value bet more often?
Yes, this is what I'm saying, right? So here we can change all these like a queen jack and like a queen 9 type hand, right? So these are like our very thin value bets. Instead of checking back these most of the time, we can just bet them most of the time.
Oh, okay.
All right, and that's our adjustment. Right, we know that opponent's not raising, we know our opponent's calling too often, so we're just going to bet middle pair for thin value and then just decide to check back the next straight because they haven't raised us enough on this straight. Does that make sense? Well, yes. we probably would just check back the middle pair on the next straight anyway. Actually, some of them are a bit really small, a half pot, but we're checking them back most of the time anyway.
Does this mean we are not going to bluff on later? I mean, on earlier street with one quarter the size? We won't, because they're calling. We won't have any bluffs.
Yeah. So if they're always calling, then we wouldn't allocate any bluffs to this size, right? So a lot of our bluffs will lose EV by betting, and so we should just retain our checking EV by checking back. Okay. There's like other things that we have to think about when we're doing that in terms of like what is our checking EV, how's our opponent going to respond when we check. So
yes,
it's not always quite so easy, but a lot of the time, if our opponent just aren't folding enough to a bluff, we should just check back because we get to see the next street and then use our draw equity to bluff. Or if our opponent checks to us, then if we know that our opponent is playing GTO, we still have a bet there. We still have some EV with our bluff there. All right, so does that make sense? Value being a lot thinner on earlier straight because they're calling too often, they're raising less often. Okay, so like all these hands can go really thin, like jacks and tens probably. Okay, right, we bet nines is a call all the time, eights is a call all the time. So you can see that because they're being called all the time, right? They're sort of overlap with, in some way at least, with the value range.
Can we say we can add the thin value range, add bluffs, semi-bluffs to them with draws? It is
well, a lot of the draws that you see have very high betting EV because you outdraw your opponent's hands enough of the time and then you value bet the next straight.
Let's say weak draw.
It goes back to the valor thing, right? Well, 5-3 of spades in GTO is checked back a lot because the draw is very weak. In terms of like once you make your flush, you're not very happy if the money goes in because you're up against a bigger flush. All right, so we've been through a lot. Does anyone have any questions about that? About this idea where we bet thinner?
Actually, about the thin value betting, if they overcall and we start betting thin with our middle string hands, right? Doesn't that weaken our check back range a lot? So it would be kind of hard.
Remember,
Yeah.
remember that when we're exploiting, we don't have to worry about being balanced as much
Oh
anymore.
yeah. Okay. Okay. But then.
So you can just play the rest of your range
Okay.
close to GTO if you don't know what to do.
Okay. Okay. But it's because I think I saw in one of Freed Sims, even if they overcall, I think you have to bet less in general because if they play solid on the turn, you can lose. The EV you gain from betting the flop isn't like it's less than the EV you lose when you face their turn probes and stuff. So is this kind of complicated or?
Look, so it goes back to the thing where if you no lock one node and you let them play GTO at the rest of the nodes, right?
Yeah.
It's just going to take one line instead, right? So if they're just playing shit in one spot, you would try and exploit that one spot as much as you can, right? But just because if your opponent isn't playing GTO at that one node, why should they be playing GTO for the rest of it?
Okay, that's true.
That's why no lock becomes a bit of a problem, right? If they're playing shit against one bet size, what means they can't? Why can't they be playing equally as shit against all the other bet sizes that you choose?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so usually if someone's playing bad in one spot, like yeah, okay, yeah. Why would they play good in another spot? Yeah, that's good logic. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
All right, so who wants to go first and present their sort of hand history, and then we're going to use sort of like this decision tree here and what we've learned so far to try and try and think a bit better about what kind of exploits that we're making. Okay, so who wants to go first?
I think we go with George in the order of whoever posted their hand.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I put my notes down in the chat if you guys can see it.
Yeah, I saw them. Yeah.
This is the where I open up pocket kings.
All right, so how about George? You just talk us through what you were thinking during this hand, and then sort of like afterwards you have your analysis about what your thoughts were, right? So not just what you're thinking while you're playing, but analyzing your thoughts, and now compare that analysis from before to your analysis now after what we've discussed so far.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to do that. So just some notes here. This hand is from a Zoom on stars, and usually it's kind of hard to get reads on opponents. I mean, I do get some hand histories, but typically I try to just play GTO unless I get a really solid read. So in this case, I don't have any reads on this opponent, and I'm kind of evaluating my play against what I think GTO should be. So in this case, I open up pocket kings in middle position, and both blinds call. And my thinking as I'm opening up this pot is that I'm obviously ready to 4-bet and get it all in pre-flop if necessary. It's a very strong hand. And then as I get called by both blinds, my default thinking, even before the flop comes, is I got to be prepared to bet small because it is going to be multi-way, and the alpha is going to be shared by the two players. So that's just being picked up from some of the earlier modules he did. So I think from that perspective, I'm thinking pretty well on this hand so far. Then the flop comes a paired board with 2 spades, and both blinds check. And my initial reaction looking at that flop is that, okay, it's paired. So there's only really one draw in place, which is a flush draw. So in this case, this just reinforces I need to bet small. And I'm also thinking as I'm about ready to put my bet in, I'm thinking into the next street, whether I have an opportunity to overbet or not. And I'm thinking, yeah, there is a pretty good opportunity because given how dry this board is, there are going to be some cards that come on the turn that aren't going to improve either my range or villain's range. I'm also thinking that I have a redraw to a strong flush. So, thus far, feeling pretty confident about the hand. So that's what is kind of going through my mind, real time as I'm playing the hand. And then looking back on it now, I think this is mostly fine. And probably one thing that I did miss out on, and I probably didn't think through, is that, if I am going to overbet on a blank turn, I really need to be thinking about, what are the other hands in my range that I would be bluffing with in order to, make a credible overbet. So I need to, one of my takeaways from this is that I need to think more about, how to balance it. If I'm going to overbet this hand, what are the bluffs I need to be overbetting with, and make sure I got a credible representation of those. So that was my post hand analysis on the flop. So I go ahead and c-bet 1/3 pot, and I get check raised very small by the small blind, and the big blind folds. So now this is more of a kind of a knee-jerk reaction because this happens a lot on Zoom. My initial reaction is that the small blind is thinking I'm weak because I made such a small bet. And what I'm seeing in my player pool is that some players react well to small bets, others don't. And I tend to sometimes think that they're reading that small bet as an exploit, something they can exploit by check raising. That basically, the reason I'm betting small is because I'm weak. Might be right, might be wrong, but that's what usually flashes through my mind when that happens. I don't know if other people have that kind of experience, but that's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. Then once I think through it a bit more, I say, okay, well, he's probably doing this with his flush draws. He might have some nutted hands, like some 4x type hands. He might have trips. And my thinking there is, okay, I got check raised, probably need to just call this. And I'm also thinking about, I just need to get the showdown as cheaply as possible. So that's my real-time thinking. And then afterwards, thinking about this a bit more critically, with the small blind check raising, with the big blind yet to act, this really should indicate strength. And it's something that I really wasn't considering at the time. So really his value range is likely ahead of my range. He's got to think that if he's going to check raise, he's likely going to be, dealing with overpairs, most likely on my side in terms of value hands. So I would think his value range needs to be ahead of overpairs. So I now need to think of his bluffs. And once again, in this text here, it's looking like flush draws as being primarily the type of bluffs he's going to be raising with. So that takes us on to the turn, which completes the flush. It's a 9 of spades. And here's a really weird thing. He checks. So, that's my first reaction is, why is he checking here? Because this certainly improves his check raising range. And now I'm thinking he's probably getting a bit trappy. I just can't understand why he would be taking this line. So my thinking there is, okay, I need to keep this pot small. Let me check back and be ready to call a reasonable size river bet. Because I really don't want to risk getting check raised again in case he's doing something tricky. Once again, I got no reads on this player. I can't get an understanding of his line. So post analysis, when I look at this, I'm thinking, okay, on the turn, it doesn't make any sense given his value range, which is flushes and quads. And maybe my best line here is to bet fold a small amount and be ready to check back the river. Rather than open myself up to a large river bet. River comes 7 of hearts, and he puts in a 1.5 size pot bet. And once again, I'm thinking, okay, this is really weird. What hand is he doing this with? Part of me is saying I got a call because I got the spade blocker, king of spades blocker, to block what he's repping here, which is a flush. And why wouldn't he not be betting that flush on the turn if he had it? And then another part of me is saying he's folding. I'm looking at the 7 of hearts. I'm thinking that hand really changes nothing in either of our ranges unless he somehow hit a miracle set or full house with a 7. So I'm thinking, what is he doing this with? So I tank about this and eventually fold. So looking backwards, afterwards, I look, I calculate alpha here, and I'm saying, okay, I got to call with 60% of my hands given his overbet size, and that means that you know, I need to be calling with 40% of my hands to beat his bluff. I myself would be betting most of my flushes and better hands on the turn. So if I'm going to be checking back, it's likely hands that probably are not flushes. And I'm thinking I probably, you know, should be calling this hand, and that, you know, folding was a mistake. So that just kind of was my thinking and post thinking on this hand.
Can I add something here? When we are betting a small on the flop, because it is multi-way, we are betting with a vast, like a wide range of combos. So first of all, if we face a check raise, this is what I plan to have in a separate call with everyone. But if we face a check raise in a multi-way pot, the first thing we need to continue is with our made hands, like pocket tens or like ace four. Where did you open? You open from middle position?
For middle
Like,
position, yeah.
so you could have like ace fours some of the times, maybe 5-4. So you gotta continue with made hands, and then you gotta continue with your draws here, like flush draws, and then you gotta start bluff catching because it is the flop. So the equity versus their value range for your draws are higher than your bluff catcher here. So you have started bluff catching with kings. I don't say it is a bad play. I am saying you have better hands to continue with. You have flush draws to continue. You have made hands, and now you have bluff catchers. And if it is multi-way pot, the first thing I see, if I am blocking their best bluffs. So if I have aces with ace of a spade, I think I am folding more than aces with ace of non-spade. If it is heads up, solver chooses aces with ace of a spade. But in multi-way, because I am blocking the most probable bluffs they have, like not flush draws, I go with red aces, for example. And then on the turn, so on the flop, you call with a bunch of bluff catchers and draws. On the turn, your draws got there. You could have flush on the turn yourself. So here you have to bet those bluff catchers to balance with your draws, with your flushes. So I think you could have somehow bet kings even smaller on the turn rather than checking it back, because if you're gonna bet your flushes, what better hands you have? You have to go with your bluff catchers on the flop. So kings are gonna be bet on the turn. This way you could like somehow control him and check back the river if he's gonna check. So you wouldn't face overbet on the thing. But at the end of the day, I think this is a good fold, because one thing, when people do something weird, which is happening with a low frequency, like here he has check raised the flop, now he has checked the turn. So they are extremely unbalanced. So if something is supposed to happen in a low frequency, like if the other position is going to bet into 3 players, if they're gonna have a dunk range with like only 2% of their range, they cannot balance that 2%. So they're mostly unbalanced here. That is why I think the river fold is good, because first of all, you cannot find any bluffs for this guy, and then he played it weird on the turn, which I think on the turn is more to our value rather than playing like having bluffs on the river. That is why I think even with the king blocker is a good fold.
Yeah, so one thing I liked about what you said on the flop when check raise, that I should be prioritizing my draws that can outdraw his value range, because my my overpairs, my bluff catchers, really have, you know, much less chance to improve.
All right, guys. So let's use a decision tree and sort of analyze it through that. Okay. All right. So decision tree. So have you played GTO so far? So we can think about your decisions about every single street, right? Because let's just start with the flop, right? So decision tree, haven't played new GTO so far. So pre-flop, you open, that's okay. And now on the flop, multi-way, do you know what GTO is in this spot? Right, and the answer is not really. So first we're going to have to discuss what the GTO line is for both players on the flop, right? And then once we answer that, we can think about reads. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so do we know what? So I have to think about what GTO play is, right? So betting small, right? So that's going to be near GTO, right? Because usually in multi-way pots we want to bet small on the earlier streets, and then we can think about betting big when we get heads up. So that's okay, and then we face a raise. Okay, and now the decision about whether to call or fold is based on that, right? So small blind raises with 2 players left to act, right? So you have a pure bluff catcher, so we know that, and we have to think about whether this pure bluff catcher is high enough in our range to decide to call, and you think it is, and I probably think it is as well. So we can call, and now we have the turn. So small blind checks, right? And now it's a decision about whether or not we're going to check and whether this is GTO in order to check back, right? So right now, King of Spades, King, right? I agree with what Naraman says, right? King of Spades, Kings looks a lot more like a bluff, because basically all of the small blinds, the majority of the small blinds bluffs would have got there. Any bluffs that didn't get there are going to be betting the turn. So the small blind has a lot of triples and flushes. So whether or not we want to turn pocket kings into a bluff is a part of that, right? But checking back kings with a king of spades is probably okay as well. There is also stuff in the small blinds range. The small blinds should have like 10x hands as well. All right, which have raised and now are just giving up. But you beat them, so you can check back. All right, and now the river, they overbet, but this is not a jam, which is a bit weird. And then you fold, right, and that fold is correct. So the way that you've played it so far, right, through this entire hand, looks okay from a GTO point of view. So are you happy with that? Is everybody happy with that?
So can you just repeat why? Did you say you wanted to bet this on a turn sometimes?
Well, if we're betting on the turn, we're betting as a bluff.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
so checking back is okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And then we're folding the river because we have a hand which we would have bluffed on the turn, but we decided to check. So we can obviously fold, right?
Okay.
So the way you play it appears to be okay, right, from a GTO point of view. And now you can think about your exploits, right? How strong was your read? All right. So say small blind raises with a range that is too strong, right? What would you do then?
We overfold and then jam.
Yeah, so you would just fold the kings on the flop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we fold
Yep.
kings on the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the raise with the range is too strong. Remember, you had a pure bluff catcher on the flop,
Right.
and so if we think that they're raising with like only flushes and fours, only flush draws and fours, flush draws and trips, like only those, then we can probably fold it on the flop, right? Even if they raise all their fours, I'm not sure how many fours that they would have, because it's difficult to judge what GTO play is in the small blind when they're flat.
What do you
Let's
think
say they
about
flatted with some
what do you think about yes, overfolding, and in the hands that you're calling with, prioritizing, those draws that can outdraw their value range. So, pocket kings, pocket aces get devalued, and nut flush draws feature more in the calling range?
Well, say you had a nut flush draw, you're paying 12.5 to win 12.5, and your equity to the next street is pretty low, right? It's
18.
only like
Yeah.
20%.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be very happy calling with a nut flush draw, but I would call a nut flush draw before I would call pocket kings,
Mm-hmm.
because of that ability to outdraw a 4. Then again, the guy could just have 10s and you're drawing dead. So in that essence, you might want to draw with the kings 2 outs instead. But in general, if they're raising with the ranges too strong, if they're ranging with just 4s or better,
Overfold.
quote unquote value, and then just flush draws, and no backdoor flush draws, no like ace of spades 10 type hands, right? Which would raise and then be turn into a bluff on this specific turn. Then you can just fold kings on the flop, right? Because they're betting too often on the turn.
Mm-hmm.
So because small blind flat or pre-flop, like, usually I wouldn't give him credit for a 4 that often, right? Is that like, I don't really know what his flatting range is, but like how I'm sort of trying to see how he has a 4 kind of.
Yeah, it's
5-4,
difficult to see,
8-4.
right? Could have like ace 4, 5-4, and 10s, but
Okay.
like so you'd say all those 3. So what's that? Like 7 combos, right? So he's got 7 combos of like trips plus, and then how many flush draws does he have? Like probably around 7. So if his bluff to value ratio is 1-to-1, right? Obviously, folding is correct.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I mean, he has 90 big blinds and he's flatting small blind. He can
Okay,
have a
so-
lot of fours.
Yeah. Okay. So he's okay. Okay.
He's gonna have all the fours.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When we put it like that, it's easier to see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So exploitatively, you can probably just fold the flop.
And then if you bet this on a turn, like, you're not going to bet it small. Like, if you want to bet it as a quote unquote bluff, you have to bet like at least 2/3 pot or something, right?
Well, I would say no, because this is what I have seen. When a guy check raises and then gives up on the turn, even a small bet from our part as an in-position player puts them in a very awkward stuff. If they want to double check raise, now they gotta do it. And if they do, we just lose only 1/4 of the pot. Or if they just elect to call, then we can check back the river. So I would suggest here only a quarter a pot bet again. Yes, we may get the risk of getting check raise one more time, but at the same time we're gonna put him in a very tough spot, because why he has given up on the turn. If he's gonna play weird like that, then we can bet a small size and to put him in tough spot.
Do you
I would
not?
say-
Do you not think he's just going to check raise, check call a lot of 4x, and then if you check back the river, you'll always lose it?
Who check back the river?
If you quarter pot the turn to check back the river, you're just always going to lose when he has a 4 or like a small flush that doesn't want to go for 3 or something weird. Like,
Yeah. I'm sort of seeing
he's-
why would I bet small on the turn? I'm just trying to figure out like what I wouldn't do that here. Like, I love betting small, but I don't think I would do that here. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
But
yeah,
I'm
I
trying to
agree
say
with that.
what kind of river sizing we want to call if we don't do this. I think
Oh, but yeah, that's the thing. I think I don't really I disagree with that. Like, I think you and George said it. Like, I don't think you should make a play to avoid a tough spot. You know, like, because I think you guys said, like, if you bet small, then he's not going to lead the river as often, right? But if your small bet isn't really that good, like, you're just kind of making a like a negative play to avoid.
making a blocking bet in position.
Yeah,
Which is kind of weird.
Yeah, so you're kind of making a play to avoid a tough spot. I don't agree with that. Unless it's a plus EV play, but I don't think.
the reason I say that because he has given up on the turn. So all his bluffs got there. all his
Yes.
value hands, maybe his trips are scared because now he says, shit, flush got there. So he's going to check his pocket fours. Trip fours. So if this is the case and we don't want to go to cheap showdown by using this trick, then we got to fold to any river bet. We got to be done with the hand on the turn.
Okay. I think that's probably better, right?
This
Yeah,
goes
so
back to
maybe-
what I was saying about turning kings into a bluff, right?
Yes.
So if
But
a king's is a bluff, then you've pretty much given up with the hand, right? You know you're not your chance of winning is pretty low, and so that's why you would want to consider turning it into a bluff. You're trying to bluff them off trips,
Yeah.
right?
But then
So that goes back to the exploitative stuff, right? I played in
Thomas-
GTO so far, maybe. Do I know what GTO play is for the spot? Not really. I should probably learn it. Do I have any reads? Not really. So default to GTO, right? So GTO might be to bluff this some of the time. If we're bluffing, right, some of his range is going to be trips, right? Some of his checking range, probably most of his checking range is going to be trips. It's difficult to see what he would be betting with as a bluff if he did decide to bet, right? Because he has to have some non-flush draw bluffs on the flop, and so some of those could be just like X of spades 10, like 10 with a spades, but those are offsuit, and so he's probably not going to have too many of those offsuit hands in his pre-flop range. So then it becomes like really difficult to see. There could be some like backdoor nut flush with the hearts type stuff, which you could be turning into a bluff.
yeah.
So are you saying if we decided to check back the kings, we are going to fold to any river size? Yes, he's overbetting here, but let's say he is betting 1/3 of the river pot, the pot. We are gonna still fold kings there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Exploitatively or GTO?
GTO.
Even GTO, because GTO, we are going to have our kings as a bluff on the turn. So we bluff. So that hand is a bluff. We either choose to bluff or we give up on the river to any sizing. If this is this is GTO, I think.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. If we decide to bet, the turn and turn ahead into a bluff, I'm thinking if we check the turn, then we have to call it alpha for the river bet. I mean, if it's a 1/3 pot bet, then I think we're calling pocket kings here.
Well,
I don't think we should call it alpha. An opponent check raises the flop.
I'm
He
sorry,
just
folded
doesn't have
alpha.
enough bluffs on the turn.
we gotta know if kings
Right.
is a bluff catcher on the river or an unused bluff candidate. Pocket kings here is an unused bluff candidate on the turn. We could use it as a bluff. So on the river, it is not a bluff catcher to come into alpha.
Like if you have ace of spades 10, it's probably better bluff catcher here than kings with a spade, because
Right.
you block two combos of their boat, which definitely could take the line of trying to check raise the turn,
I agree. Yeah.
as well as blocking a bunch of spades. But then when they do bet, it's difficult to see what they're bluffing. So they could just be bluffing with like hearts. They could have ace 10 of hearts or something, and now decided that it's no good, and they're just going to ship it as a bluff.
So Thomas, what do you think about the cheap showdown trick I mentioned? Like just
Well, it doesn't make any sense at all if your opponent's range is just all hands stronger than you. So we're just
It would be
avoiding
better
them.
if he has a 10. Yeah. If he has a lot of 10s for some reason, it would be pretty good.
Yeah, if he has a lot of tens, yeah.
But just to make sure, like if you bet this on a turn, it has to be like sizable, right? Not a quarter pot.
Well, if you bet us on the turn, you're trying to get what to fold as a bluff?
Like
You're trying to get
like trips, I guess.
4 trips to fold. Yeah, okay. So
You can't bet quarter pot, right?
well, I guess you can if they're folding trips to a quarter pot bet.
Oh, but like, oh, they're not going to do that, I guess. But if you like want to bet and barrel the river, like you can't bet a quarter pot, right? If you want to bluff, I guess. Like the quarter pot's not a bluff. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, in GTO exploit, because like you could use quarter pot in terms of GTO, right? Because remember, all the time they can just check raise you, right? Remember, if you look at the at the drop-offs video, they do have to have some check raises if they have like an ace of spades 10 hand, which can like check here. It's difficult to decide because you're not really sure what the small one pre-flop range is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so does using the decision tree and what we've discussed so far make it easier to judge what we're doing in this hand, and does it make it easier to discuss exploits at least?
Yeah, I think it makes it easier to discuss exploits.
All right, who's next?
I think my hand was next.
Alrighty.
I didn't have a hand tracker. I just typed it into the chat. Are you gonna show that on the screen or?
I'll copy and paste it.
Okay.
So I'll put my hands on a PDF. I don't know if anyone saw that, but it's fine.
All right, everyone can say that?
Okay. Yeah, I can see it. Okay, so this hand, it's online, but pretty much like live dynamics because the game is kind of plays like that. So I open cutoff, ace jack to 2BB and small blind flats. I think that's pretty standard. And then on the flop, small blind leads into me. When I was playing the hand, usually when I see this, I don't really have like a statistic or a large sample to prove it, but just like maybe it's memory wise, but usually it's this is pretty weak. Like it's either like it's like a non-showdown hand or just like a random middling hand. But maybe I'm wrong here, but usually that's what I've seen over my personal experience. So I just want to call to let him, because if I raise, I think he folds a lot of his stuff that he would barrel. Like I think he would be aggressive on the turn. So I want to call to let him keep barreling, pretty much. And I don't think his hands have a lot of equity against my hand. Yeah, so I just call. And then on the turn, when he checks, I think he's giving up a lot. Or sometimes he have a marginal hand, like maybe he just bet like a weak ace or something. So I just want to bet small because mostly just like he won't defend enough against it, and sometimes he'll call me with his marginal hands. Yeah, that's what I was thinking during the hand. But after, I'm thinking he might be inelastic with his if he has like an ace or maybe a queen. Like maybe he's still gonna call like a 6. If like 7 or 8 BB, he might still call that. So maybe I should just bet bigger here. But at the same time, I might induce something if I bet small. So I don't really know what to do there. And then I got min raise. I really don't know what to think of this. So I just call. I think this is the part in decision tree where I don't know what GTO is here. So this is where I'm just shooting in the dark. So I don't really know what to do. So I just call. And then on the river, he checks, and this is also part of decision tree. I just don't know what GTO is here. So I just don't know what to do. Yeah. So I just don't know if I should bet this or whatever.
Okay, so how about you step back a bit and analyze what you were thinking as you were playing the hand. So you told us what you were thinking and try and analyze what you were thinking.
Okay. So yeah. So on the turn, maybe I was thinking, like he's just gonna. I think he's just gonna fold a lot here. So I just want to bet small. So maybe he comes along with something stupid, or like he just calls with a marginal hand. So I'm thinking he's gonna fold a lot. Like he's just giving up here. So against that, I don't know.
So I would say, can we go one step back? So do you agree that a small blind should not have a lead range here, GTO wise? The small blind should check his entire range to you. Now why not? It is ace queen 4.
Or he can have ace queen or fours. So maybe I don't know.
Whoa, he should 3.
Yeah, if small blind's having a flatting range, it's going to be tighter than yours, so he should have some leads.
His range might be actually, yeah.
Or if he has a lead, it is very low percentage of the time.
I don't know about that either.
It might be like 10.
So I am saying that if people tend to go with one of the branch of the tree, which happens with low frequency, like he should check, let's say 90% of the time and lead 10% of the time. If he elects to go with that 10%, it is hard to be balancing that 10% for those type of people. So they are unbalanced. They're extremely unbalanced when they lead to you. This is the first message I get from someone that he shouldn't be leading that often, but they select to lead.
All right, so I'm just gonna jump in, right? So you open in the cutoff, and then the small blind flats. All right, so when the small blind flats, their range has to be tighter than yours by quite a bit. It has to be tighter than like a big blind flatting range. I mean, it has to be tighter than a big blind flatting range, obviously. It has to also be tighter than a button flatting range because small blind's out of position, right?
Yeah.
So the small blind's range is actually a lot stronger than the cutoffs here, and so him having leads is totally normal.
Okay. So I guess I didn't even know what GTO was on a flop. Yeah, because I thought this was pretty weird. But yeah, what you're saying makes sense.
So if he has a leading range and then you call, I mean, your calling range, I think you're now going to the turn with an equity advantage typically, right? Is that a true statement?
I don't know.
Your calling range, probably you're going to have a stronger range than his leading range, assuming he has a balanced leading range. Is that a fair statement?
So usually when the small blind leads, right, they're leading with some value type hands and as well as some weaker type hands, and then you call, right? Once you call, you've folded out a lot of the weaker hands in your range, and so when you continue onto this turn, right, it's basically a brick. A lot of the draws type bluffs type stuff that the small blind would have now missed in some way or another, and so now Hero's range has a greater equity advantage over the small blind.
Okay.
Whether or not they have a nut advantage, probably not. The small blind probably still has more nuts than Hero does because Hero should have a raising range with some of his nuts on the flop.
So I guess what I was getting at with that question, that is on the turn, if, given that it's a blank, the offsuit, 8 offsuit, Hero should be betting here.
Yeah, I think
should be betting his equity advantage. Should be betting it small.
That's true.
Yeah. I think that's what I was thinking. Yeah, but at the same time, like maybe exploitatively, like if he has a hand like a weak ace or something, like that's gonna call a bigger bet, right? And then if he has a give up, it's probably gonna fold to any size, maybe.
Right, so go back to a decision tree, right? Have I played GTO so far? So let's just assume, yes, so we're on the turn now. Let's just assume, yes, I played new GTO so far. Do I know what GTO is in this spot? Is it to bet small with his hand? All right, yes. Do I have any reads? Do you have any reads?
Like not very strong.
No, so then just default back to GTO, right?
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to worry about exploits anymore because you don't have any reads.
Okay, yeah.
So then that means you played it well, right? And then when you face a raise, probably also GTO to call.
Mm-hmm.
Right in the river when they check. Do we know? Does anyone have an idea what GTO is here?
No, I don't know.
They check raised again. Wow.
Well, they led the flop and then they check raised the turn.
Check raise.
I think, I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes I still have the feeling when I bet a small, for any reason, like here we have range advantage or we bet a small in the multi-way pot. If somebody makes a move on me, the first thing that comes to my mind, George has the same mindset that they are making this move because I made a small bet and they think I'm weak. So we don't know how these small bets make people crazy. See, he min check raises, and I think this min check raise doesn't mean anything because first of all we don't know this guy's range, and then we are betting a small. Maybe he's just check raising to see where he is at. One of those weak players always have this justification that I want to bet or min check raise to see where I am at. So because of this, I think it is too thin to bet the river.
Okay, so right, do I know what GTO play is for the spot? All right, so we've got to think about what GTO play is for the spot, right?
Yeah.
So like we don't worry about what our reads are, which we don't have any.
Yeah.
Right, we just think he's a fish because he's taking a weird line, which isn't always true, right? He could just be taking a weird line because he's actually very, very good, and he's trying to exploit us. So don't think just because they're taking a weird line, they're doing it because they're a fish. They could just be much, much better than us. All right. So do I have any reads? If the answer is no, then default to GTO. Do I not know what GTO is right now? I should play GTO, right? So GTO is probably going to be a check, right? So after they check raise the turn, they're actually pretty polar, right? And there's going to have some river check raises as well.
Is the min range check raise
big blind, so have a set or like a straight? I'm probably just going to jam. Actually, if I have a set, I'm probably just going to pot it.
Mm-hmm. But is the min check raise on the turn, is that polar for you? Like I don't really know what to make of it. Like, is it polar or is it like why wouldn't he go bigger?
So why would the GTO spot does not exist? So in your decision tree, you're asking what is the play of GTO in this spot? What if that spot does not happen at all? You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, you should play the best strategy, right? You should play even if it never happens, right? Because they're not playing GTO, there is still a GTO strategy for you, right? There's still the best strategy against any possible counter strategy, right? Even if they should never be making that play, or they should be making that play with such small frequency, that it's very hard to see, right? They could be making 1% of the time, something like that. But a min check raise is not out of the ordinary, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's something I don't see, so I just didn't know what to make of it. So this can be polar sometimes, you're saying? Oh, it should be.
Well, there's going to be a polar component to it. And it's going to also be just a bunch of like ace X as well.
Okay, yeah, because I just don't.
Always calling the ace jack is okay because you beat that ace jack, that ace X component of their quote unquote value range.
Can we say something? Can we say a player who flats 2 BB from a small blind is not a good player?
I think.
No, you can have flatting range in the small blind and still be pretty balanced, right? The reason why I don't is because like if you look at the sims with small blind flatting ranges, it's just like very, very small. It's gonna be like less than 1%, but you can still do it. A lot of this in the decision tree is like you should be very afraid that your opponent is trying to exploit you. Okay, you should be very afraid that your opponent is better than you, right? So you should give them credit, right? Okay. Just because they're playing in like a weird way doesn't mean that they're bad. Okay, it could just be that you're bad and you don't understand how bad you are. Your opponent is so much better than you that you don't understand what's going on, which is exactly what your opponent's done here. Right?
So Thomas, you know, with the turn raise, you said there's a polar component, and then he checks on the river. I think I've seen that, you know, just because you check a polar range on the next street, it doesn't mean that your range is no longer polar. So he could still be polar on the river. Is that right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so it could just be like a bunch of give ups. Like it could be between 90% give ups and then like a 5% calling range and then a 5% check raise range. So whether you want to bet into that.
Okay. But and
Probably not.
yeah. So is his min raise on a turn? Is that like a standard size? We would say, or is it just something he should use sometimes?
It's probably just something he should use sometimes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
So what
Okay,
did end up
alright.
happening?
He checked and I checked it and he had an ace-6 offsuit.
Alright. So
But, yeah.
we can say his min check raise was those type of to see
Well,
where I am at.
I don't know. Like maybe like it's maybe he can do it, but I don't know. I don't have anything on him, right? So
Well, you could be betting a queen, so
yeah,
All
that could be
right,
the new thing too.
I see so you're saying we should give them a credit even if they're playing some weird line.
if you don't have any reads on them, give them as much credit as they deserve.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
now that you see that he's
This line
it's
doesn't
ace-6 offsuit
do
instead, I mean, now you can, if you see him again, you know he's probably not that good, right?
Yeah, he was spazzing.
Yeah, well, the ace-6 off, yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was very weird. I just didn't know. I was very confused. Like I think Thomas said what he's right. Like this weird line confused me so much. I think I probably would have made a lot of mistakes. I guess that's it. That's it. I guess.
Yeah, so the weird line confuses you. So when you have like queen 10 and you bet like this, it might be really good for the ace-6.
Yeah. Like, I would.
Or if they've got like ace queen and then they just like you bet small and they just jam on you, like you're feeling pretty shit now, then aren't you? Anyway, so who's next?
I can do it. I can post my hand. Screen share. Oops. Do you have my hand now?
Have you shared your screen?
Yes. Do you see it now?
No.
No.
No, something's going on there. I'll just.
I don't know. It is a tiny PDF I sent it.
I'll just put it up here. So let's not hide the. All right, so yeah, okay, you can talk us through this because the hand isn't formatted very well.
Yeah, sorry about that. Because this is live, I tried to write down all the details with all the information. So it is a 2-5 no limit. The effective stack at this point is 700. Many limpers with bad players. So under the gun limps. Another guy who's a villain limps from middle position, and I make it to $25 over 2 limps with ace king offsuit. Here suits doesn't matter, so that's why I haven't mentioned that. So everyone folds except the limpers. The flop is $80. I did not consider the rake here. Flop comes king 6-3 rainbow. Both limpers check, and because this is multi-way, I bet quarter a pot. But this quarter a pot, I do it with a variety. I even do it with queen as well. I do it with sevens. So I bet the first limper folds, and the second limper, who has the responsibility to bluff catch as the person who closes the action and is last to act, he calls. So the reason I bet 1/4 was only because this is 3-way. Turn is an offsuit 7, so no flush draw, no backdoor flush draw got front door, just offsuit 7. And the pot is 120. Villain checks again. And at this point, I told myself that because of 2 reasons. First of all, most villains in multi-way pot, especially if it is a dynamic flop, or if it was flush draw, they can't stand to just to slow play their 2+ hands. So they raise a good chunk of time with their 2+ hands. So they become a straightforward. And now because he has only check called the quarter a pot bet on the flop. And I told myself on this turn, I should become polar because this is not a turn that improves my range. But I cannot go that large because he could turn two pair like 7-6 or straight, which is 5-4, very likely. So I decided to go to 2/3 of the pot. So because of two reasons I chose this one. Because the first reason I thought he's capped, so I can go for larger size. The second one that I thought the turn improved his range, so I cannot go too large. And now he check raises the turn to 220. So at this point, this is that came to my mind. So if we bet on the larger side, we are polar. We should be more polar in general. And if we got raised, this should happen with low frequency because in general, villains should not attack our polar range because we can perfectly play against that they raise. But if they get to raise and attack our polar range, first of all, it happens with low frequency. And if he does do that, he should go over the large size and he should have the nuts sometimes. So, which is the case here. He decided to go on the larger side and then he has the nuts. He could have 5-4 here. So what are his bluffs here? I gotta know if I can find enough bluffs for him, then I call. If I cannot find enough bluff for him, I just fold. So on that point, I told myself, what are her high likely bluffs? So the bluffs on the turn are combo draws with no showdown, usually, or draws that pick up equity on the turn, which is not the case here. So at this point, the fear came to me and I started to convince myself that this guy is not bluffing because I could not find enough bluffs for him on this turn. But at the same time, because I have worse hands to fold, like King Queen and King Jack, I thought Ace King is close to top of my range, so I decided to call. Now we go on the turn, I'm sorry, on the river, and he bets half pot 250, almost half pot into 560. And this is my thought. I said, so most of villain's bluff, again, on the turn should be combo draws. And this is a spot that is hard to bluff from a bad player. And why I call him a bad player? Because he limp called. So now I gotta overfold here. And I have better hands. Of course, I have pocket kings. And as I told you, I have pocket sevens because I bet sevens here because of the backdoor flush draw. I'm sorry, backdoor straight draw. I'm betting quarter of the pot, so it can be considered as a value bluff. I am denying equity from Jack 10, from Queen Jack, or these kind of things. So, and I could myself have some 5-4 suited some of the times. I don't attack two limpers with 5-4 suited that often, but I do it sometimes. So because of this, I decided to fold. And then I asked him, hey, please fold his hand. And he showed 5-2 of clubs. And so one thing I learned is that these quarter pot bets that we do in multi-way pots, this just makes people crazy. I mean, first of all, yes, I don't say 5-2 is a bad call. It is not a bad call. But I see people call with Jack 10 backdoor flush draw here. And because their range is so wide on this turn, of course they're gonna have bluff from this wide range. So we should not overfold if they decided to pull a move or we got check raise on the turn or even lead to us on the turn, because this aggression comes from a very wide range. So this is what happened, and I got bluffed off.
Okay, so using the decision tree, we can think about which parts of of which decision, right? So there's multiple decisions here which we can look at. We can think about. So let's just think about the river decision. All right. Did you play GTO getting to the river?
Yes. I have no reads.
Okay, so you play GTO getting to the river. Do you know what GTO is in that spot?
Yes. But it is like a conditional probability. I started to be scared from the turn because I couldn't find bluffs on the turn. So maybe it is better to focus on the turn first. So what is the GTO play on the turn?
All right, so have you played near GTO so far? So betting quarter pot on the flop, yeah, that's probably okay. Do you know what GTO is on the turn? All right, so first off, do you know whether or not betting 2/3 once the 7 comes is GTO?
I checked it. We could bet some of the times, yes, but not that often because 7 is a marginal card. It is a better card for him. It is not like a offsuit deuce that we can become polar with peace of mind. This 7 is a tiny bit better for his range. But,
Yep, I agree.
but we still can, like, that's why if we go polar, I would bet pot. Because the 7 is kind of good card for him, I bet 2/3.
So say it was a jack, but what would you bet?
If it is a jack, jack is a good card for me, then I choose a smaller size. There is no need to become polar.
Yeah, okay. So I think if it was a jack, I would bet twice the pot. Anyway.
So if you could help me with that, because I'm looking at solvers sometimes and looking at cards that either help the better's range or not help the better's range, and trying to figure out whether you go polar or not. So, why would the jack make you bet twice the pot if it's good for? I mean, you're saying that's good for.
It's actually good for good for him, right? So because all of the draws missed, right? So here the 7 is a brick for your range because you don't have too many draws, right? You don't have the 5, the 5-4 or the 7-6. Right, so an absolute brick for you, and then they might have like 5-4 and 7-6. Right. So then it's just like a brick for you, and it's bad for them. So they should just be leading because you should be checking back quite a bit. But if it was a jack, right, it's a brick for both players, right? So then when you have a strong hand, which their sets a lot of the time should just raise the flop. A lot of your range is going to be checking back on a jack, and so the rest of your range is just overbet. And it's actually pretty similar to this sim here, except the range is going to be way narrower. But on a jack, you can like overbet a good chunk of the time. It's going to be different because the range is going to be narrower for both players, but it's the same idea where you can overbet some stuff.
If it is a deuce, is it an overbet as well?
Well, the deuce completes the straight, so.
Oh, okay, I got you. So yeah.
Anyway, assuming betting 2/3 with the ace king is okay, I'd probably just check back to 7. Assuming that's okay, right? Do you have any reads?
No, I mean, all I know is that I should not give him too much credit because he limp called. These type of players, he was limping all night, but I couldn't see any showdowns. He was limping, limp calling. I don't give that much credit to these type of players, but the thing that I usually try to see if a player limp calls a lot, so he has more of a passive personality, passive style of play. If he's limp calling, he's a passive player. And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's check raising huge and then barreling the river. So at this point, I just forgot about GTO and I stick to my player profile. That he's passive now, he should have it.
Okay.
This was a mistake.
Well, then it comes down to the strength of your read, right?
Yes.
So you have a weak read, so you can't really deviate as far as you think you can. You definitely can't deviate to folding your entire range. So you have to think about which range think about which hands are in your range and sort of how to rank them. Obviously on the river, you have basically a pure bluff catcher with ace king. Okay, and if it's just a weak read, okay, how far do you want to deviate? Do you want to deviate by folding some of it, all of it? Are you folding king queen, king jack on the turn? Right? Is king queen and king jack on the turn a fold against this raise in GTO? If it is, and then your weak read makes them 0 EV, and your weak read makes them fold, right? And then suddenly they bet the river, right? It's that kind of thing. There's other stuff as well, right? You have to think about, if we go back to this, where is my slideshow? We're facing about an earlier street. So the strength of the betting range, how strong is their check raise range on this turn? And is our opponent going to be aggressive on the next street?
I don't know. I mean, see, we have seen two examples. Guys has check raise and then give up on the next street. Here he has check raise and has continued on the next street. So it is really hard to know on that spot. And also, the only thing that I thought maybe I should overfold on the turn is that because I couldn't find enough bluffs for him on the turn.
All right, so if you can't find enough bluffs on the turn, then his range strength is too high.
Okay.
Right, and so then you can think about overfolding. It depends how good your read is, right? If you think that your read is strong enough to do that, then you should just fold it on the turn.
I think folding king queen and king jack on the turn is already overfold.
Okay, well, okay, so we can think about it in terms of GTO. So what is the weakest hand that you're value betting?
On the turn is king jack.
Okay, so it's king jack on the turn, right? And then like, what does the rest of your value range look like, right?
The rest are aces, better kings, or I don't have sixes probably. I may have sevens and pocket kings.
Okay, so it's like this. Do you have the offsuit hands?
Yes, because I have king jack offsuit because that's it. Yeah.
All right. So what else? You got sevens. Okay, let's say you have all sevens, sixes, and threes. Do you have threes?
No, I don't raise threes over two limps.
You raise you raise sixes and sevens?
I raise sevens for sure, but sixes I don't think so. But I might. But I know I have 5-4 suited some of the times just to cover the board.
All right. Well, let's just say half, and then like half. Okay. So you got all of them, and now against this raise, right? This is just getting into like bare bones, like the math, right? The raise size. Okay, so 80 into 120, right? So then, so it's 80 plus 120. 280 is the size of the pot, and now he raises 160 into 180 into 280. So 160 divided by 280.
No, 140. Sorry, 140.
What's going on?
It is 140 more. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You do your way. I have another approach, but we got the same results.
Hang on, 220 minus 80. Yeah, 140. So 140 over 280. So it makes a half pot raise, right?
Yes.
So alpha for half pot raise is what, 1/3. So we should be folding 1/3 of this.
Yes.
Okay, so we can just fold from the bottom. So we fold these two. That's 48, right?
Yeah.
But that's assuming that you always bet these hands. So this question is, do you always bet the king, queen, king,
On
jack?
the flop, yes.
Well, not on the turn.
On the turn, I still think it is a bet because the guy, he can have a very worse kings. This is a limp caller. He doesn't have better kings than king jack.
All right.
It is thin. I agree. King jack is thin, but I think king queen is a good bet.
Right. So then you overfold the turn, right?
Yes.
And then do you also want to overfold the river?
I think we shouldn't overfold the river now because nothing has changed. We have already overfold once, so there is no reason to overfold twice. Or maybe we just can't say, oh, this guy didn't give up. I called his check raise. He's still betting big, so I should overfold again. So these are the toughest spots. I really didn't know what to do on that point.
All right. So if you're not overfolding, then your range looks like this, right?
Yeah. 5-4, yes.
And you fold 1/3 of it.
He's betting half on the river, so I should fold less.
1/3. So if you fold all the ace king, then you'd be overfolding.
One thing is that on the river, ace king is better than aces.
All right. Let's say we fold aces first. And now, like, still, if you fold ace king, you'd be overfolding, right?
Okay, so I should call with some of the ace kings.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's based on your decision to overfold on the turn, right? Because of your weak read, right? If your read was a lot stronger, then you could also fold ace king on the turn.
Okay. But at the end of the day, they have a very wide range. See, he had 5-2 on the turn. He could have many gut shots on the turn to pull.
Yeah.
This
Okay. So I think actually the best way, like from an exploitative point of view, right? And I haven't really talked about this in the slides, but the best way to exploit this would be to check back the turn and then bluff catch the river, because the range is going to be a bunch of just air, which they're going to like pot it and hope you fold, but you can just snap it off with ace king. And so in that sense, you win a pot size bet from all of his like air, which is just not going to happen if you bet.
Oh, I hear what you. So another approach is could be betting a small again on the turn. They have a wide, very wide, vulnerable range. There's no need to bet big. So I should have bet either a small again on the turn or check back, bluff catch the river.
I'm more inclined to check back and bluff catch the river.
Okay.
Because I'm in position. I like doing that. And as well as because of this specific turn card isn't so great for you, so you should be checking back a lot because of that. All right, does anyone else have any comments about this hand?
Yeah, this is a slightly different subject, but you know, when I'm looking at some of the solvers, and you know, you'd mentioned earlier that the jack, instead of a 7, if it were a jack, that it's a brick for hero as well as a villain that probably would be. I think you said you probably would be overbetting that.
I think, George, 10 is a better example here. 10 is an absolute brick and doesn't improve my range because I don't know if I bet king 10 there, king 10 suited there.
Right.
Or 9. 9 for sure is a brick. So we could.
Right. So that would give you an overbetting range on the turn, right?
Yes.
Would you agree, Thomas?
Yep. So a lot of the turns you want to check back a lot, and when you do bet, you overbet.
Right.
Right. It also goes back to that exploitative thing where you check back and then bluff catch the river because their flop range is so weak. And a lot of players are just going to bet all of their air on the river.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a very easy call for you, even with like some marginal hands. All right, so who's next?
Yep.
I think it's Tom, but he went AFK.
Oh, I'm back.
Oh, okay. What about
Yeah, I don't mind.
Celine?
Yeah,
I
I think it was Caton who was next in line.
Oh, we already discussed Caton. I think we did Caton before.
Okay, then I think it's me. Sorry, I was gone for a second, more than a second. Do you have my hand, or should I open it?
Yeah, let me just check this.
Yeah, this one. So 9-10 offsuit, I open from cutoff for 2 big blinds. It's not something I do often, but like players behind me are not very 3-bet happy, so I decided this would be profitable. And flop comes Queen 10-5. I have a middle pair and a flush draw. The first thing I do is that I just check my range when someone calls me in position. Like I'm out of position and someone calls me in position, I just check my range. So I just did that, and when he bets, so I can check call or check raise because I'm not going anywhere with middle pair and a flush draw. And I decided to check call because my reasoning is that this hand is a good hand, but like when I want to check raise, I want to block hands that are just gonna destroy me. Like, and like I want to block the ace of diamonds specifically. So, and this hand is strong enough to call anyway, so I don't need to just bluff this one here. I can just call. And I called. So we go to the turn, Jack of Spades. This is in my opinion, this is a great turn for me because it completes my jacks with the diamond anyway. It completes my ace king, gives me the nut straight, and I do from time to time have, I do have like queen jack or jack 10. So overall, it's gonna be a good turn for me. And I check. He bets 9 big blind, and I check raise. Now, at the time, I didn't give too much importance into his bet size, which was a mistake. Because like if the board is monotone and they bet the flop and they suddenly size it up on the turn, it's gonna be value to bet most of the time. It's gonna be a strong hand, but I didn't think of the size. I just thought that I couldn't call this hand and right now, and I had a somewhat okay bluffing hand because I blocked the 9 of diamonds, I blocked 10s, I blocked queen 10, I blocked jack 10, even though it shouldn't be betting the flop, and so I decided to check raise. Now the river is not the greatest river for me because it completes his queen jack and kind of makes my ace king a little bit less valuable. Also, my slow played flushes on the flop kind of get a little bit less valuable. But all in all, I do still have full houses like pocket tens, pocket jacks, which is a quads now. And so I decided to bluff this one because, I mean, villains full houses is going to be mostly tens and maybe jack 10 and maybe queen jack, the suited variants, not the offsuit. And so blocking tens is going to be good, so I decided to jam. Now this is my thought process, but at the time of my thinking, I thought 9 of diamonds was a relevant card, but when I thought about it later on, it turned out wasn't really that relevant because, like, at most he can have ace 9 of diamonds and 8 9 of diamonds. Other than that, he's not gonna have any diamonds, and I'm not even sure if he's gonna have ace 9 of diamonds. So this hand only blocks 10s, so I don't know. Do I have to say anything else?
So why
No,
do you
so-
think
so-
the turn is a good card?
All right, so
I mean, at the time I was playing, I thought the turn is a good card for me. I thought the turn was fantastic for me because I could definitely have ace king, and I could
but
definitely
what are
have
you getting
jacks.
value from? I mean, you should see his range as well. How does his
Yeah, of
range
course.
look like? So what are you getting value? Just queen X, no diamond?
No, I mean, since I checked the flop with my whole range, perhaps I didn't mention, since I checked the flop with my whole range, I'm going to have a lot of flushes, check calling the flop and check raising the turn. So in addition to that, now I get even more kind of good hands. Well, maybe not great hands, but good hands.
So
like,
if it's good for your range, I mean, does that give you a leading range on the turn?
I don't lead. That's kind of not my thing.
Well, yeah, I don't
Probably,
either.
I don't know.
I don't either. I'm just asking the question.
No, I mean, I was just trying to describe what I was thinking when I was playing. And I mean, when you're playing 6 tables, you just never lead.
All right, okay.
all right, so let's have a look at go through this decision tree first.
Yeah. Have
We
I
played-
played GTO so far? So I think I
Sort of,
played
no, not
GTO
really.
on the flop. What?
Well, the pre-flop is a bit dubious, but let's just ignore that.
Yeah. Okay, but like flop is kind of okay, I think, because I don't think we're c-betting that much, and this hand definitely is a good candidate to check call. I think I played near GTO on the flop, and on the turn, again, I think this is a good hand to bluff. I mean, it has some outdrawing capability. Like if villain has pocket tens, I can outdraw him to a straight or a flush. So, and I can't really call because like my showdown value is too little, and I have somewhat relevant blockers. So I think turn is fine. GTO wise, do you disagree, Thomas? You probably do.
I think it's probably closer to a fold.
Hmm.
to be honest.
He has a straight draw on the turn too. I think he could check call maybe on the turn again.
No,
You
I
have a
don't
low
think
straight
so.
draw on a 3 diamond board.
Like the thing is, like this hand, when this hand check calls and the river like completes any of my draws, what am I doing? Like check calling again? I don't think that's a good idea. Like I think I would rather use this as a bluff or just fold. But I think I would rather use this as a bluff. I don't know. What do you think, Thomas?
All right, so we can have a look just with the cutoff ranges. Where are they? And what's the flop? All right, this is the flop. Okay, so if we continue with just the diamonds, so let's have a look at the that didn't do what I wanted to do. All right, so it's all diamonds and like 1 diamond hands. Okay. Anyway, so what we're facing on the flop. So we're facing a bet of 3 into about 6. So alpha is going to be about a third, but we can fold more than alpha because we're out of position, right? Everyone agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so how often do we think we should be folding roughly on the flop? If alpha's a third.
40%.
Yeah, I'll say about 40%, right? So here we're at 30%, so we need to continue with like 60% of our range. So obviously continuing all the sets. Okay, set, 2 pair. 2 pair, what's going on? 3 5s. All right, so what else?
On the flop, what do we continue with?
Yep, so straight draws, let's say.
King, queen as well, ace, queen. All of the king, queen, ace, queen combinations. All of the kings, aces.
King, queen, jack.
Yeah, every queen I'm continuing. Queen 9, queen 8, queen 7. And then tens, ace 10, king 10, jack 10. I'm probably check calling again.
All right, so that looks about right. So maybe like an ace 5 as well. You know, a bunch of 5s. There's no backdoor flush draws, but anyway, let's just say some 5s. And then it's like, these are all some 1 diamond hands, and then we're following the rest of it, right? So all agreeing, this is just like some back of the envelope calculations here, but we can get an idea. And then once it's turned the jack. All right, so from this, they bet a little under pot, so we're folding like half the time. So we continue with some stuff. So all our flushes again, I think are all going to continue, obviously. Hang on, what's going on? These don't exist. These don't exist. All right. All right, so all the flushes continue. It's not a flush. It's not a flush.
Are we talking about the turn right now?
Sorry, I should be trying to get the flushes specifically. Yep, so this is the turn. That's not. Okay.
I don't check call my entire range.
Yep, but it's getting a quick idea as to where it is. Obviously, you're going to raise some of these hands, so they won't be even in this range, right? Anyway, so let's go from the top, right? So we're folding like half. All right, so the sets can continue, and the 2 pair, I guess, can continue, and then the flushes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to continue with some other stuff as well. So like with a spade is probably better than with, sorry, diamond is probably better than without a diamond. So some of the stuff with a diamond. It's like some ace of diamonds type stuff, or ace X with the ace of diamond. Let's just go with the ace of diamond actually. Just follow that. And then there's some other stuff. Diamonds, ace, continuing aces, and kings with the diamond. And then like this stuff with a diamond. And then you're getting pretty damn close to where you think we should be. So like some of the stuff with a diamond, jack 10 with a diamond. So that's all the 10s with a diamond, all the queens with a diamond. And then that's around half. Right, so knowing that 10-9, yeah, maybe. I mean, specifically with a diamond. Actually, jack 10 is 2 pair now. I should probably put all them in. as well as queen jack. Okay,
Yeah.
so along with the two pairs, we could probably fold some of the one diamond 10 hands. So then like 10-9 is getting really close.
Yeah.
Right, 10-9 with a diamond is getting pretty close. Actually, king queen is a straight, so probably should put that in as well. But anyway, so yeah, 10-9 with the diamond is getting pretty close. Like king 10 with a diamond is probably a much better candidate here. Like 10-9 shouldn't even be in our range, but say king 10, if we like a king 10, that makes a lot more sense. Or like an ace 10 with the ace of diamonds. Those obviously make a lot more sense here as a bluff check raise.
The thought I had during the hand was that I would be check raising something like king 10 with the king of diamonds rather than 9-10 with the nine of diamonds on the flop. So when I check call, I thought 9-10 with the 9 of diamonds was kind of like my best bluff candidate. Is that wrong?
Thing is, like, how strong is just the 9 of diamonds, right? It's not very strong.
Yeah, it's not.
Like
on the turn,
ace of diamonds 9, which might have floated the flop, is a lot better. Right, you got the nut flush draw as well as the gut shot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Anyway, so all right, so you check raise and then you get the river and then the river pairs, right? And now you have to think about all the hands that you could have raised on the flop, on this turn, right? Which you would have raised as well as with this 10-9 of diamond, and then whether or not those should jam instead of this hand. You're out of position, so it probably doesn't make too much difference in terms of what your EV is, because you're checking EV for all of these hands are going to be like 0 near 0 anyway. But then maybe you just pick hands with better blockers as your bluff jam instead. Maybe this means that for this all-in size, the 10 is the best blocker.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, blocking the 10 is kind of what we want.
So on the river, we are representing a full house.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, on the turn, I'm sometimes check raising 10s or jacks.
I know. We should see what we are bluffing, what we are repping on the river as our value range, and then find the appropriate bluffs for that. So
on the river, I'm repping backdoor. I'm repping flush, not flush, and I'm repping full houses, basically. Because I mean, jamming not flush is not that thin on the river, is it? I don't think so.
Yes, but not many of them, because first of all, you're gonna check raise some of them on the flop. Okay.
Yeah.
You check call. I don't think nut flush is too thin on the river, but we only have nut flush. And what kind of boats do we have? Do we have pocket queens?
We have 10s. Yeah, we have 10s. We have pocket jacks as quads and pocket queens sometimes. I don't think I'm check raising pocket queens on the turn. I think I'm just check raising 10s and jacks. And 5s are probably check raising on the flop more often than not.
I'm saying because our value range is narrow on the river, there is
that's what
we are over bluffing at this spot. There might be a chance.
Yeah, that's why I said river is just not really the greatest card in the deck for me.
10x hand is a good hand to bluff because we have pocket 10s more than quad jacks.
Yeah, I mean, as a bluff, I'd much rather like king of diamonds 10 or ace of diamonds 10, but yeah, I think it's okay. Because the whole blocking the 10 blocks like some mid jack 10, which they could be playing, and 10-10, which they could obviously have, which is actually pretty important. So like blocking boats is pretty important there, which is going to make a decent chunk of their calling range, right? Obviously, they're just going to be calling like flushes plus, right?
Jack 10?
What?
Do we check raise jack 10?
No, never. Just check call.
Yes, but we do check raise sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your check raising sets as a bluff there.
Yeah.
Or
I
is
used
it
to not
semi-bluff?
check
I just
raise,
have
but like,
a lot of equity.
yeah, just check raise to have the both on river pairs.
So what did end up happening when you jammed?
He went to a really long tank and called with King Jack of Diamonds.
Oh, he had the flush?
Yeah, he
Flop?
had the flush on the flop.
Oh, I see.
And when I reviewed this hand, I only realized that his turn bet size was 9 big blinds into 11.5, and
It is a big one.
like this is like a huge red flag.
Well, okay,
It should have been a
let's
red
if,
flag.
if you manage to get him into the tank with King Jack of Diamonds, then I'm okay. Then I guess your bluff was pretty good then. What is that? What is
Yeah, I couldn't believe it as well. Like he used all the time bank he had.
King Jack of Diamonds. How did you not just snap that off? All right. Okay.
So,
Yeah. Anyway.
Thomas, I have a question. It is out of this hand. If we are done with this hand.
Well, I want to discuss like,
Sure.
did you have any reads? All right. So let's just say this was GTO, right? For argument's sake, did you have any reads?
My read is that when I check on the flop, people bet too often, and my opponent specifically, when I check this flop, he just wants to barrel twice, because he thinks like if he barrels twice and checks back the river, it's better for him because he kind of tries to prevent me from getting ahead with my one diamond hands. Like basically my read is that he bets too unpolar, too dipolar on flop and the turn.
All right. So he's betting he's not betting polar enough on the flop. What does that mean we should
And
do?
the turn.
Well, and the turn. So one he's too aggressive on the flop.
Yes.
Right, which means obviously we can trap stuff like our flushes and then delay them until the turn because you said that they're betting too often on the flop and the turn, and then checking back the river. Right. So obviously the exploit there is what? Say we flop the flush. What's the exploit against this player that's betting too often on the flop and the turn?
The exploit is to just check call the flop, and then either check raise the turn or check call the turn and donk the river.
Yeah, right. So both of those are okay. And now if he's not polar enough on the flop and on the turn, which is actually pretty difficult to be. But anyway, if he's not polar enough on the flop on the turn, for his sizing, what do we do?
I think since he's betting too many middling hands, we should be check raising him aggressively with bluffs, because like a lot of his a big portion of his betting range is just not going to be able to stand to pressure.
Yes. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So I think given those reads, the line that you've taken is totally fine.
But one thing I should tell you, I agree with you on the flop bet. Yes, when you check, many people just stab at it. But regarding the large sizing on the second barrel, I think he is polar there.
Yeah, I would probably consider just check raising the flop.
Yeah, that's what I didn't notice during the hand. Like when I reviewed the hand and I noticed that he bet 9 big blind, actually, I was like it should have been a huge red flag, because when he bets 9 big blind, he's gonna have a good hand. No matter, like, he's not even bluffing enough on the turn, I think. So I didn't notice the size. I just made it 3x, whatever he bet.
It's interesting hand.
All right, is everyone happy with this hand? All right, right. So last is Tom. Tom, do you want to explain what you were thinking when you were playing this hand?
I don't know if he's there.
All right. So what do we got? Ace Jack. How do you call heads up to the flop? All right. Let's not mind that then.
Can I ask
Okay.
one question, Thomas? I have. Can we still bet high valor combos versus a player who never folds on that specific street and overcalls? Let's say we are against a player who overcalls and does not fold. Can we still bet non-value hands but with high valor?
Well, a lot of the very high valor hands are technically value bets to start with, right? So if you look at some sim stuff, like a lot of the flush draws will have EV higher than the pot, right? So to call a high value hand, high valor hand, a bluff there doesn't make too much sense.
So I mean semi-bluff.
Yeah, a lot of the semi bluffs are really future value bets, which is what the concept of valor is.
So I'm talking about a player who doesn't fold. So we are actually making a pot big in case we get there.
Yeah, usually a lot of the time, a good chunk of the EV from a semi bluff comes from them folding.
Okay, so
Right. So if they don't fold, we should still just check back.
how come? But we make the pot big if we get there. We win a bigger pot. So let's say we have a monster draw, okay, and the guy is a calling station. Should we check back our monster draw or should we bet?
Well, if it's a calling station, is it still a calling station if you check back and you get there? Probably.
Yes.
Like, you checking back doesn't make him no longer a calling station, right?
No, it doesn't. But I'm saying maybe we cannot get that amount of value if we can bet. Like, let's say if I check back the flop and get on the turn, I have to bet huge to get the same amount. If I bet the flop, he calls, and I get there on the turn.
All right. What's wrong with betting huge?
Maybe he's not calling your station versus betting huge. That is the thing.
Okay, then why don't you just bet huge on the flop?
Because it is out of GTO. Why should I bet huge my monster draws?
Well, you just said he doesn't call correctly. Whether he ever folds, right? So like, you gotta be pretty accurate about what you're saying.
Yeah, I hear you. So we don't have this concept that bet semi bluffs to build the pot in case we get there versus a calling station. We don't have that.
Well, a lot of the EV. So there's two parts, right? So you got semi bluff, which still has the ability to value bet once it gets there, right? A good chunk of it is just getting them to fold, right? But if they're not folding, then you're actually probably still in good shape, right? It depends on like how much equity your hand has, right? If you have a monster draw, the equity that your hand has could be greater than 50%. So in essence, you're just value betting, right? Because you're going to get there so often. Right, so say you have the nut flush draw and they call with king high, was your bet for value or as a bluff, right?
Okay, it is a value.
Yeah, so you've got to make that distinction whether you have this monster draw and they're calling too wide. Well, yeah, of course you can actually value bet because your equity against their calling range is against their continuing range is greater than 50%, and they're not raising you very often, etc., etc. It's the definition of valor, right? It has a very high ability to bet the future street, right?
Yes, but the problem
because
is
its equity is so high.
If I don't semi-bluff on the flop, then when I get check raised, I am only with my bluff catchers there. I don't have draws to defend my betting range. versus the check raise.
Remember that when we decide to take an exploitative line, we don't have to be balanced.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So I just all right.
So we should play near GTO up until the point where we want to deviate, and then once we deviate, we no longer have to be balanced after that.
All right.
Which is the first part of the decision tree. Have I played GTO so far, right? So like, if it's no, right, because I made a deviation, then I just continue with the current exploit, right? I don't have to worry about being balanced anymore.
Can I ask another question?
Yep.
Before this hand, we were talking about a hand in a multi-way pot, and so yeah, the hand is not important, and like the hero was betting one fourth pot on the flop, and only one person continues, so we on the turn we choose a bigger sizing. And what happens if both of them continue? Do we still bet small, or do we kind of
Okay,
go
so
big?
have you watched the video which I put up
Yeah,
on
I
multi-way,
I
the
was actually
0-1
that-
games? No, the 0-1 games
What?
one.
0-1. I watched every video on the site, so I probably should have watched it. If you put on something new, maybe not.
This one?
Multi-way 0-1 games. Okay, this is new, right?
Well, it's one of the new ones. It's been there for like a week and a bit. Anyway, right. So try and watch that. But basically, once it goes call overcall, right? The person who's overcalling should have such a nutted range. Should check back everything.
Okay.
The overcalling range should be so nutted that they should start leading the next tree. Okay.
But exploitatively, if they are making such huge mistakes, like overcalling with, I don't know, second pair or something, we can still bet, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, it depends on what the first caller has as well. How wide their range is going to be. If both players, like in these multi-way pots, right? If both players' ranges, that continuing range is just so wide, then your value can become a bit wider as well. Especially if the first player doesn't understand that he should follow their bluff catches.
Yeah.
Right? If they don't understand that, then like you can go a lot wider.
Yeah, 90% of the players don't understand that, I think. Like.
All right, so does that answer your question? Because Tom wanted you to discuss this hand.
That answers my question.
All right, so Tom, do you want to talk us through this hand and what you were thinking, etc.?
Okay. So I'll talk about the exploits on the guy afterwards, I guess. Yeah. So we open the hijack with ace jack suited to 3 big blinds, which is my standard live open sizing. Cut off 3 bets to 10 big blinds. We call. I did think about 4-bet bluffing here. I will do it occasionally with ace jack suited, but essentially like 200 blinds deep, I don't love it so much. Out of position as well, we're going to get called reasonably often and just have to play out of position with sort of a mid-range, like not a nutted hand particularly. Well, unless we make a flush list. So we call. Flop, we flop middle pair in the nut flush draw. We check. The bets just over half the pot, and we decide to flat. Again, I can go both ways on the flop. Like as you were saying a minute ago, this is one of those hands where we sort of just have more than 50% equity against like almost everything except just set with Queen Jack, I guess. So like if we just get it raised, get it in here, it just feels like it can't be that bad. But again, like this guy was fairly aggressive. I think he's gonna barrel off on a lot of runouts, including ones where we make the nuts. So we call. Turn comes a 4, giving the board 2 flush draws. We check. He bets on the larger side, but still less than pot. So we're never folding. I don't see any value in jamming here, really. and I'm not folding, so I call. River, I didn't write what the river is. It's a 6 anyway. So it's a river was a 6. So basically irrelevant unless he somehow has like 7, 8 spades or clubs, I guess. Basically a brick. We check he jams for like 1.1 pot, and we now decide to fold. So if you look at the hand GTO wise, I mean obviously preflop is pretty sure that's standard according to your ranges, Thomas. Flop again, I think we're probably playing fairly close to GTO. Just check calling. I don't know, I mean, to be honest, I think the whole thing is reasonably in line with game theory. Just on the basis of like we can't really fold before the river, and on the river we just have second pair and the guy jams. We just have better hands to call with. I'm going to have ace queen here. I'm going to have queen jack suited. I'm probably going to have pocket fives. Yeah, I'm going to have pocket fives. I would think we're probably going to have enough just calling down those hands. This guy was the type of guy who I'm never folding ace queen on the river. And I might not have all the offsuits calling the 3-bet preflop.
All right. So, do you see anything? Okay. Does anyone see anything a bit odd about some of the stuff that Tom said?
Oh no.
I would say ace jack suited is not a good 4-bet candidate from hijack versus cutoff. It is too good. You have suited aces smaller than that you can 4-bet with them, like ace 5 suited. Even
I think
ace
the
10
opposite. I kind of think the opposite. Sorry.
So ace jack suited, if you want to 4-bet, you gotta see ace jack is better or ace 5. First of all.
No, but like you're 200 big blinds deep. Like he's not gonna be jamming.
No,
and you kind of need good hands to play in 4-bet pot.
If we 4-bet, first of all, we want to fold equity. Then we want to call.
Look at the screen.
I think it can go either way. This is 100 big blinds deep, 200 big blinds deep. Can't be.
Big blinds deep.
Some of the ace king
Shouldn't
offsuit.
ace jack be better?
The difference that I'm making 200 blinds deep, I don't know, is I'm going to remove some of the ace king from my 4-bet range. The ace king off, I'd probably still 4-bet. Ace king suited, I'm going to flat at least some percentage because it's sort of more disastrous if we get 5. Like if we 4-bet to 40 blinds, 100 blinds deep with ace king,
Okay, I think you're
just
the other way around. Ace king offsuit should definitely be flat more often than ace king suited.
Ace king
anyway,
suited should 4-bet.
Anyway, so let's just have a look at the hand as it's played, right? So you got a calling range. Now, who here has a donking range on the floor?
The hijack. Hijack has all top sets and middle sets.
Yeah. Okay. So queens can flat preflop some of the time. Yeah. All right.
Especially this deep, he has more queens to call.
Versus this guy, I was 4-betting queens. As played, I don't have a dunking range on this flop, but that's maybe not correct.
All right. So it goes back to sort of like this decision tree. So which decisions do we want to have a look at, right? So like your statement about the pocket fives, not having pocket fives here, right? It's a bit I don't think, or maybe you do have pocket fives if you're making a decision to just check call down with pocket fives because of what you know through the decision tree, right? So first off, like, have you played GTO, new GTO so far, right? So I agree on the flop, and now let's get into the turn, right? So you're saying about not wanting to fold the turn and then not also wanting to raise it, and then something about they're betting less than half pot, so you're always calling. Well, what if they overbet the pot? Would you still call? That kind of stuff you have to think about in terms of GTO, right? So do you know what GTO is in the spot here on the river, right? So we can probably agree that in terms of GTO, you play it okay. And then you have to think about which way can you try and change your strategy in order to exploit them. Right. So the reads that you have. So what were your reads?
This guy is going to be very aggressive. Sort of just mostly that. Very aggressive, very wide pre-flop. Yeah. That.
All right. So if they're aggressive,
yeah. I mean, as I said, I'd seen him. A minute ago. Yeah. I mean, the previous hand we saw was he raised 10-10-9 with a flush draw 6 ways in a limp called pot, and then called off a 3-bet jam from the tightest guy at the table with ace high, no flush draw. Like, I think he's kind of just all over the place. His pre-flop, certainly, he just has like loads of stuff.
Okay, so
and
then
he was raising whenever he didn't have anything.
If his pre-flop is bad, then you can just 4-bet the ace jack suited.
Yeah, that's one when I say I considered it, but
yeah, anyway, so let's just assume that his pre-flop wasn't too bad. So he's aggressive and he's too wide. Okay, so knowing that, if we're deciding on whether to call the flop, right? What should we do? All right, so say we have pocket 5s, right? Which is same with pocket 5s. What should we do if he's too aggressive? Pocket 5s, pocket jacks. If he's way too aggressive,
check call.
Yeah, we check call, right? Now, if it's way too wide, okay, so what should we do sort of in general if it's just too wide?
Check raise. I think so.
Well, you can check raise. You can also just check call, right? So you're folding a lot less if they're really wide.
Okay.
Right, so it goes back to sort of like the post flop icing a bet on earlier street. How strong is their betting range, right? If the betting range is just really weak, then you call or raise more, you fold less, right? And you do it on the earlier street, so that's okay. And then when you get to the river, right, it's a pretty easy decision, right? It's a pot-sized shove. Okay, you sort of decide whether or not they're over or under bluffing. And how strong would you say that your read is on whether they're over or under bluffing? Do you have any idea about what do you think about their bluffing tendency on the river here?
No, not on the river.
So you don't have any idea, right? But you do have some idea on the earlier streets?
Yeah, I'd say he's over bluffing flop. Sort of unsure about turn. I'd err towards thinking he's over bluffing. The river, I honestly don't know.
All right, so if he's over bluffing the turn, that means his range is too wide. And so what we can do is we can just raise more, and so you can just check jam the turn.
Yeah.
All right, so that's one of the exploits that you could have made into this hand.
Mm-hmm.
Does everyone else agree with that? Does anyone else confused by that?
I didn't understand the check jam the turn.
Because his turn betting range is too wide.
But he's betting large, so is it good to, assuming he is polar?
Well, no, we're not assuming he's polar, right? We're assuming he's over bluffing the turn.
Yeah, I'm thinking he's less polar than he should be here on the turn. That's what we're saying.
So there is a merit in bluff catching the turn as well. We just check call with jack. Maybe he's just spazzing with ace king.
Well, I think the thinking is that he's over aggressive on the flop and turn, and he's going to play the river perfectly.
Yeah,
right.
That's
so you need to check raise a turn.
So if there's a guy that he's over aggressive on the flop and turn, there are two ways. The one is check raising the turn. The other is check calling the turn and leading the river. So we should decide which line is better to go with.
No, you can do that with a very strong hand like 5s, but with like this middling draw type hand, can you still lead the river?
No.
Yeah, probably not as much.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay,
you
yeah,
can just
lead
check
the
jam the
small
turn,
river.
right?
Okay.
Wait, so does this hand gain EV if we check jam the turn?
Well, against a GTO player, it's probably not. Right, it's probably going to be 0 EV, right? You're going to be check jamming the turn some of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's going to be indifferent between check jamming and check calling. And then it's just like your exploit is you're going to move towards check jamming because his range is too weak.
Okay. Okay. So he's going to be folding too much to the check jam. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Also, you want to deny equity from like king high.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But don't we have a pair? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But
we
king high
have
doesn't really have. Yeah, the king high doesn't really have much equity, does it? It only has like 8% or something. Well,
Ace King or King 10 have some actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, okay, I can see. Yeah, King 10 Ace King. Okay. Okay.
So this is something that I see a lot when I'm playing live. Is that we see the really aggressive players tend to bet the flop and turn very aggressively, then give up on the river. They're looking to get a fold on the turn.
So against, well, if he's okay, well, I guess you check raise makes more sense.
Against a player like that, you can just check call the turn and then give up on the river because they've given up all their bluffs. But the question is like whether or not they were bluffing enough to start off with on the flop, right? If their range was too strong on the flop, then you should have folded all the way back at the flop.
So the check jam, I think the check jam is less favorable to me than check call, because as George also stated, this guy is not gonna triple barrel that often, so we can retain the pot by overcalling the turn, and then he's gonna go check on the river because he's not gonna barrel bluff that often on the river. You know what I mean? So we could bluff catch wider on the turn because river is gonna go check.
Yeah, okay. I agree.
So I'm saying then why we should check raise the turn?
But it depends on how polarized they are, right? So if they're a lot less polar than you think, then check jamming here is okay, right? As a semi bluff.
Okay.
Right, so you have to think about how polar they are, right? And I don't know about what your understanding about what villain is, but from my understanding from what Thomas said is that villain is really wide, like a lot wider than it should be. So the range strength is a lot lower, the polarity is a lot lower.
Yeah. And assuming he's not gonna bluff the river, we could check call, which he did here, and check fold the river, which he did here.
Yeah, okay.
I think this line might be better than check raising the turn, but as you say, we don't know.
I think, Tom, you said you saw him earlier triple barrel?
No.
You call it 3-bet on the flop, right?
Yeah, he just made a ridiculous call off.
All right. Okay.
I think he was like clicking buttons with like single raises on flops and stuff, and then sort of once pots got big and like with the turn of the river, the river specifically, I just don't think he was going to be like playing monkey business as much.
I think because we don't know his range that good on the turn, the safer approach is to just call, because we don't know if he's polar or not. We really don't know.
There's one slight piece of information that might be kind of helpful. Which was put in the original comment is when we get to the turn, I check. He starts picking up chips. He initially picks up like to bet about £40, and then spends like 30 seconds gradually adding more and more and more chips to his hand until he sizes up to 75, which for me actually sort of did start to polarize him a little bit more. Or rather, I don't think he's merging his value bets so much here. Like, I think if he has a value hand here, he has a stronger one, or if he has a draw, he has like a strong draw. Although that's difficult because we block them. But I don't know, just like whatever credence we choose to give to live reads, I have like reasonable live read that he was quite strong in.
Did he show his hand?
He did, yeah.
Okay.
Oh wait. Is this a call on the river with GTO point of view? I don't think so, right?
Probably not. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, because maybe some of his triple barrel bluffs would be like ace king or something.
Maybe.
Yeah. So this is kind of like I don't know.
I'm just gonna have
I don't know either, but I think yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, like, this has got to be like the worst ace jack to call down, right?
Yeah.
And we're just gonna have enough queens, jack, queen jack, pocket queens, pocket jacks, pocket fives. Like we just have enough strong hands. We don't need to call down middle pair that blocks out flush draw.
Like this might be like a 10% call, like maybe, but I would feel okay folding this on the river. But I guess you got all like the reads going on, right? So, but I think I would feel okay just folding this on the river. Like I wouldn't think too much about it.
Yeah, I mean, I tanked it for a little bit just because I just was trying to decide whether this guy was gonna be 3-barreling me. But I decided that we just had better hands to pull.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Yeah.
As I said, I didn't really know what. Like, if we go back to Thomas's flowchart, I didn't really know what he was doing on the river, so default to GTO, which is I thought was default.
Okay.
For what it's worth, we basically confirmed all the reads once I was like, "Oh, nice hand, man. Yeah, well played." When they got to the river, and he's like, "Yes, it was," and shows me Queen 4 suited.
Sure, Queen.
Queen 4.
Oh, Queen 4 suited. So he had you.
Yeah, he had me, and he was definitely strong on the turn. But, yeah.
So maybe that tell you told about it was relevant. He was adding chips to his 40 pounds.
Yeah, I mean that's why I started giving him all this. Oh, well played, man, on the river to try and get him to show his hand to see if I could verify that call for later on.
All right, radio. So, does anyone have any questions?
I have one more question because I've been trying to digest this. So in multi-way pots, we bet a small because the game tree is complex and we don't want to lose our bet in case we got check raised or raised. Is that correct? Why do we bet a small on multi-way pots?
Okay, so remember from the multi-way 0-1. So you can bet and with your value range against the player to your right.
Yes.
Okay, so you're betting for value against the player to your right, essentially, right? And the other players will have to fold all the hands or sort of raise them, right? Which means that you can narrow down the field a lot with just a very small bet.
Okay.
Right. Then once you go heads up, then you can worry about playing heads up against them.
So I want to know what is the exploitative adjustment versus a crowd of people in a multi-way part. They don't fold our small bets. They don't fold our small bets. Does this mean that we shouldn't bluff at all?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, it was noisy. So we are in a multi-weight pot against a bunch of people who love to call our small bets. This happens a lot with high frequency. That is why I want to learn it. So we bet a small in a crowded pot, in a like 4-way pot, 5-way pot, and these people have a tendency to call this a small bet with a huge wide range. So there are two adjustments. The first adjustment is that we keep that sizing because it is multi-way, but we don't have any bluffs. Or we go higher in sizing with respect to the strength of our hand. So if we have top set, we bet big. So which one is a better approach?
Look, if they're just not responding to your bet size, then there's no reason why you can't just bet according to the strength of your hand, and just not bluff, right? Like, there's no reason you can't do both, is what I'm saying.
Because I have been bet, they will know they're not like that idiots. So most of the times I bet a small because I don't have top set. I have top pair good kicker that I just want to protect somehow.
Right. So remember, with your strong hands, like betting small, that you get EV a lot of the time because
we will get raised.
Because you get raised, right? So are you getting raised enough?
Okay, so can we say to just have a decent strategy against a crowd of people who love to call our small bets is to just bet for value?
Yeah.
With the small sizing?
Yeah.
But the issue is that if we get raised like George did on that hand, and let's say he didn't have any semi-bluffs, then he's going to be vulnerable with his only bluff catchers there. He won't have any draws to continue against the check raise.
Okay, so yeah, so you're confusing the two concepts, right? You're confusing whether or not you should play GTO or exploitatively. Right, so remember, once we've made an exploitative decision, we don't have to be balanced anymore, right? We don't have to go back to GTO, right? We can play unbalanced if we're making an exploitative play. If we're making an exploitative play with some of our range and not the rest of it, we can play the rest of our range at GTO, right? As if we had those hands in our range still.
How about having only value plus some of high valor hands? I think this is a decent strategy because now if we get raised, we have some high valor draws, like flush draws, not flush draws, to call with.
Okay, so like, if you're playing GTO, right, it might be a case where you would bet all those hands, including all the very nutted hands, in a small bet range, right? And then when you get raised, you just fold a lot of the middling bluff catching type hands, right? And you just continue with your strong draws and then your nutted hands, as well as some of the stronger side of the nutted of the draws, right?
Yes.
If you're exploiting where you move both your draws into your checking range and your nutted hands into a higher bet size, right, you can still play the remainder of your range as if those two other parts of your range were merged into that, and just fold everything. You're still playing it as if it was GTO with the other parts of your range which aren't in there anymore because you made the exploit, as if they were in there.
Increase sizing. We agreed to stick to the small sizing with the nutted hands because, as you said, we get value when we get raised. So let's say we are not going to have large sizing. We are always going to have a small sizing on the flop in multi-way pots. But this betting range consists only value hands. That's it. So when we get raised, these value hands turn into bluff catchers, and now we have no draws to continue because we are going to check our draws. Because
okay, so then your exploit was to check your draws, right? You can just play. You can play the rest of your range as if those draws were in your range, but they're not, right? So you can play as if they were in your range.
Okay.
Right, this is one way of playing, or you can just fold them because you know your opponent's not bluffing enough.
Yeah, I think I'm wondering, the question is, if the opponents are call happy on the flop and you decide you're going to bet a bit smaller with your value range, and that value range includes hands that may not be able to deal with a raise, then your assumption about the exploit is wrong anyway. So you just fold that hand, right? I mean, you exploit, assuming they're not going to raise, and if they raise, you just happen to be wrong with that exploit with that party arranged it can't deal with a raise. Is that the way to look at it? Like, for
Well,
example,
the exploit might be right, and you just got unlucky.
right. That's what I'm saying.
But George, the thing I have seen in live that I have seen the guy winning massive pots because he has bet with the draws, and now a guy has check raised him with his value hand, and now the guy binged his draws on the turn and stags him because
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, to me that's a great
Well,
play.
there's no reason why you can't stack the guy if you just check your draw and then get it
it's just
cheaply.
too obvious. It is just too obvious that you check back and the draws when you bluff catch and draw gets there, the guy doesn't know if you are bluff catching or your draw gets it. Like say in George hand example, if he had like queen jack of a spade and now the turn gets there, so the small blind doesn't know if George has pocket aces, red aces, or he binked the turn because his range is balanced. Now it is easier to get value from that guy versus I just check back and when my draw gets there, I suddenly become aggressive.
Well, you can still bluff with a whole bunch of hands. Like you have to be really clear about what deviation you're making and then sort of why you're making it, and sort of like consider what other deviations that you could be making as well.
Okay.
So if you decide to check back all of your draws because betting is not going to be very good for you because they're always calling, that's okay. Okay, and then when they raise, you can just fold a bunch of your bluff catches, right?
Right. I think we cannot say we are gonna be 100% on balance. Yes, we are gonna exploit people, but we still should be tiny bit balanced at the end to just surprise people, to just uh, make them guess.
It goes to how strong your read is, right? If your read is very strong, then you're going to have a very, very big deviation. If your read isn't very strong, you're not going to deviate very far, or if at all, right? So it might be in the case that in GTO you bet a bunch of these draws, and that's okay, and your read isn't very strong, so you're going to be betting a bunch of the draws some of the time. If your read is just spot on that these players are calling too wide, which there might be, then you should just not bluff with the draws, right? You should just bet a lot of these weaker hands for sort of thin value.
Another luxury that betting is small with a wide range, even against these calling station, does to us is that we bet small, knowing nobody's gonna fold or at least one person gonna call. Then we get heads up on next street, so we can steal the pot from that guy. In versus just checking back our draws, So that is one thing I have been doing.
Okay, well, it goes to like how much you have to risk to get to that spot, right?
Yes, exactly.
You have to risk. You have to probably risk a lot to get to that spot, right? So you know that they're never calling. So you say you bet quarter pot, and then you have to bet like twice the pot on the turn. You have to be folding by a lot. There's also stuff about you being raised on the flop, as well.
Okay, I think I should do some math to see which strategy at the end gives us higher EV. I know we may get check raise, but I'm talking about people who check raise value heavy.
Well, even if they check raise,
Then we have a lot of implied odds by having draws in our betting range. Because
I think you. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about what the comment there about implied odds. Because I can just check fold when the draws get there. So
they cannot. They cannot check fold their check raise range. Like if this guy had trip fours on the turn, he's not gonna fold on the turn if George has flush. He
I
cannot.
think what you're saying
Why not?
is what you're saying is that the players are so bad enough that even if you get there with your flush on the turn,
Yeah.
they're just going to worry about the fact that they've got a strong hand, and they're just going to go with it.
Yeah, because they are bad, so they're gonna bad on Nexus 3 too. So he's not folding trip fours only because flush got there, and George passively called a check raise, which he could have anything else, any other stuff as well. So
Okay, so
it is very hidden.
It's an exploit.
okay, so it goes back to the strength of your read, right? So make the deviation based on the strongest read, right? The what read you're most confident on, right? You can have a whole bunch of like really weird, vague reads on your opponent, right? I think he's going to do this some of the time, da 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 da. But a lot of that just comes together and it's like, oh, I should just end up playing GTO against him anyway. That's where he's going to make the most money, right? And it's like, okay, well, you didn't have to deviate from GTO in order to know that all these vague regs end up you having to play GTO against him. Okay, when you're making an exploit, just focus on making one big exploit rather than a whole bunch of weird small exploits, which you have to combine together in some strange way in order for it to work.
Okay, now it makes sense.
Because if in order to make all these weird exploits line up, you could just win just as much playing GTO to start off with.
Okay.
All right, so it goes back to the three questions in the decision tree, right? Have I played GTO so far? Do I know GTO right now, going forward? Do I have a read? And then how strong is my read, right? So once you answer all of them, you can come up to a good exploit, a good deviation from a strategy.
Right.
Does anyone else have any questions? Good.
Yeah, thank you very much for this call.
All right, so everyone's happy with what they learned so far. Okay, so
Yeah, very good call. I got a lot out of it.
Good. All right, so I'm gonna end the recording now, and if you guys have any questions afterwards, just ask me. All right. So anyone who's watching the recording afterwards, thanks for watching.
Thank you.